listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Do black lives still matter? I don't mean black lives, of course, but capital BLM. Black Lives Matter may be reaching the end of the line. Certainly if the Millwall crowd in this weekend's football fixtures are anything to go by, people are running out of patience with taking the knee. And will Boris Johnson take the knee to the European Union by the end of this evening or at the latest tomorrow? Or will he stand up and tell the European Union to go off and do one, whilst pocketing for Britain £40 billion of a divorce settlement that will no longer require to be paid? And is it the end of the line for Donald Trump as court after court kicks his suit out of the door? Just because Donald Trump says there was widespread fraud doesn't mean that it isn't true. Just like when he said there was fake news around. That didn't mean that wasn't true either. And what about the vaccine? It's here in London, at least for the privileged few. And we're asking, have we bought the right one? All that and panto. I'm in my very first pantomime, and I'm not the horse's rear end. Fasten your seatbelts. This is rock and roll radio with pictures. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's going to be a good one.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We are in crystal clarity on FM 105.5 in Washington, D.C. And Donald Trump is finishing his burger and Coke and settling down to watch us this very evening. But in the rest of the United States, you have to make do with AM. From burning city to burning city, right across the wonderful US of A. You can listen on AM. You can listen all over the world on the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the 500,000 plus people who watch every week as well as listen, then listen up. If you are watching on Facebook, please share right now. Share with all of your friends, all of your contacts on Facebook. You can watch on my own Facebook page or on RT's multiple Facebook pages. Ditto on YouTube, on my own channel. Do subscribe if you visit it. I think it's over the 100,000 subscriber mark now, but why not push it on a little bit further? Or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, you can watch on Instagram, and as I already know now, many of my friends are watching on Twitch. But however you're watching, whether now or on catch-up or on the clips during the week, please spread the word about this extraordinary, global, open University of the Airwaves, where there are no tuition fees, there are not even any commercial breaks, and you are encouraged to speak back to the teacher. Do black lives still matter? Well, of course, black lives still matter, but does the capital BLM movement, now a party, or intended to be a party in Britain at least, does that still matter? Has taking the knee run its course? Personally, I've thought so for more than a few weeks. If something becomes something that you have to do, if it becomes merely ritual, then it loses its original meaning. And that's before you consider the separatist political agenda of the capital BLM, Black Lives Matter, with which few people agree. There's a poll in today's newspapers in Britain that 55% of the people polled consider that BLM has been racially divisive rather than bringing people together. There are other ways, better ways of acknowledging not only the role that colour plays in discrimination, bigotry, hatred, and death, but other forms of discrimination, bigotry, hate, and death too. The poor are not only black, although more black people are poor as a percentage than white people. White privilege is a real thing, but that doesn't mean that all white people are privileged. Tell that to the children that were scrambling around down coal mines just a little over 100 years ago. Tell that to the millions of white soldiers sent by their kings and queens into the charnel house of the First World War. And on that subject, the issue of whether or not 2020 is the worst year in history is laughably easy to deal with. My former colleague in local radio, Dan Wooten, associate editor of the Sun newspaper, tweeted earlier, but was gracious enough to acknowledge my point in contradiction. He tweeted that 2020 was the worst year in history, which it could only be if you didn't know that 1940 existed, when not 2 miles from here, London was on fire, when the Nazi Luftwaffe was raiding Britain every day, every night, killing tens of thousands of people. That was a worse year, as was 1941, 42, 43, 44, and when the V2s began arriving, even 1945. So it doesn't hold up as the worst year in history. But the fact that someone as important in the media as Dan Wooten didn't think of that point indicates the extent to which coronavirus hysteria has consumed almost all else in public consciousness. Actually, if you want to go back to 1916, 60,000 British people were killed in a single day on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. That was in one day. Now we have, of course, now lost well over 60,000 people in the course of at least 10 months of this year. So the coronavirus is not a small thing, but neither is it the biggest thing that has ever happened. We'll be talking, of course, as always, to Moat's medic, Dr. Ranjit Brar, mainly about the vaccine and whether or not we've bought the right one. We'll be talking to the wonderful Rachel Blevins about whether or not Donald Trump has reached the end of the line. Has he run his course? And here I want to make a point that is not often made by people of my political stripe. Just because it was Donald Trump who described the corrupt stenographers in the American media as fake news, that doesn't mean that it is untrue. It is absolutely true. And just because it's Donald Trump who's claiming that the presidential election last month was rigged, that doesn't mean it's untrue either. My own view is that the US election was entirely rigged, and not just on the day, rigged by big tech in the run-up to the polls, particularly the deliberate suppression of the gigantic scandal that never was over Hunter Biden's laptop. If that story had not been suppressed, the result of the presidential election might have been different. But do I believe the Democrats stuffed ballots the length and breadth of the United States? Yes, I do. Tammany Hall did not pass into political infamy for nothing. The Democrats, the political machine of Tammany Hall and of Chicago and of San Francisco and of Philadelphia and Detroit, Michigan, many other places. The Democratic machine is thoroughly corrupt and thoroughly corrupting. And so it is perfectly possible, perfectly, that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. The question is, can he prove it? It looks as if he cannot. And whilst he has set himself up with a casus belli for fighting again in 2024, it looks overwhelmingly likely now that Joe Biden, although he may not know it, will be giving the speech at the inauguration in January. And we'll be asking Rachel what that means for America and what the prevailing conditions will be in which Joe Biden will take power. We'll be talking about pantomime with a man who's not only the owner and chief executive officer of a Scottish football team which, against all the odds, has spent the last 7 years in the Premier League in Scotland, but is, as a recovered alcoholic and drug user himself, has spent well over 30 years, nearly 40, saving children in families who are entirely blameless, saving children in families who suffer the curse of parents who are drug and alcohol dependent. We'll be talking to him, and not because he put me in his pantomime. Which part I play, you'll have to watch and see. But I will tell you, it's not the rear end of the pantomime horse. But you'll get a chance later in the show to identify who you think is the horse's ass of the year. That should be fun on our second poll. Now, I mentioned earlier the taking of the knee. Millwall in southeast London is a hard, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly working class football club with support that included one of my political heroes, the late Bob Crow, the leader of the Railway Workers Union, who might have had as his own motto, the motto of the Millwall Football Club that he loved. We are Millwall, no one likes us, we don't care. Now, it's true that hardly anyone likes them. It's equally true that they don't care, but they have now written the name of the club in either fame or infamy by booing the players taking the knee at the Millwall game this weekend. I would personally never boo anyone taking the knee. But as I said earlier, I think it's run its course. The question is, are we going to end this in good order with other forms of memory of those who have been the victims of racial violence and other forms of violence? After all, it's racial violence when white European countries invade Africa or invade Asia or subjugate most of the world to effective slavery and serfdom as mere colonies of white European countries or white North American countries. That's racial violence too. It goes both ways, you know, this argument. I've got people telling me on my poll at the moment which political statement is acceptable at a football match. A, taking the knee, just 16%. B, wearing a poppy, 56%. C, none, 28%. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. But a lot of people are saying wearing a poppy isn't a political statement. But of course it is. Ask James McLean if wearing a poppy or not wearing a poppy is a political statement. It's a controversial statement. Certainly for James McLean, certainly for many Irish people, it is a very controversial statement. Because, of course, in wearing a poppy, one is not merely remembering the fallen in World War II, which should never have been fought, the fallen of World War II, which, thank God, it was fought, should have been fought earlier, and thank God it was won by a coalition central to which was us. It also means wearing a poppy for the fallen in the crater district in Aden, in Yemen, about which we'll be speaking later this evening. One of my earliest memories is the skirl of the pipes and the swirl of the kilts as the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders mowed down Arabs in their own streets in the crater district in Aden, in the Yemen. It also, of course, for Irish people, means honouring the memory of the fallen in the long conflict between Britain and Ireland. You couldn't get much more political. Now, I wear a poppy, and I support the British Legion's funds, but don't tell me it's not a political statement. If it were the case that you could wear a poppy or not wear one without attracting opprobrium, that would be a better point. But of course, we all know, and the James McLean example proves it. You get booed everywhere you go in England all year for not wearing a poppy when you're from Derry and Bloody Sunday and the paratroop regiment gunned down 13 people and killed them, unarmed demonstrators, in your city. So don't tell me that wearing a poppy isn't a political statement. So the question is, are we going to have no political statements? Are we going to have only one? And what about those who don't agree with it? You can vote now on my poll. Now, the vaccine, finally. It's here. 800,000 doses are here. It didn't come from here, of course, but we are the first country to deploy on a large scale this particular vaccine. I'm taking the vaccine. I begged RT to give me the Russian vaccine, Sputnik 5, live on air here, but it never happened. I asked the Chinese if I could have one of the many new vaccines that have come out of China, but that didn't happen either. So I live in this world, in this country, and I'll be taking the vaccine as soon as I can. I'm not sure when that will be. Dr. Brar may have an idea about that. But I do have serious questions about many aspects of this particular vaccine and the company that made it. And we'll be talking later about those legitimate questions. For example, why are we buying in such huge numbers at such huge expense a vaccine that cannot be transported at less than minus 75 degrees? That, in terms of portability and practicality, is a very, very tall order. As far as I know, it's also a vaccine you've got to take two of, when there are vaccines that you take one of and can be kept in the fridge. So I'll be asking Dr. Brar, and I'm asking you what you think of this rush for this particular vaccine. In any case, it's going to be the mother of all talk shows. Rachel Blevins, up next.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson sat-nav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on. Yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, Rachel Blevins is my whip-smart colleague on RT America. I spent all of last week, every night, being interviewed by her. Now I get to return the compliment. She was standing in for Manila Chan, presenting the In Question program on RT America that I do every night at 7 p.m. UK time. But Rachel Blevins, who is exceedingly young, is not just any kind of broadcast journalist. Remember, you heard it here first. She has a big future herself in American politics. When I'm long gone, remember, it was me that first told you that. Rachel Blevins, welcome as always to the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with Donald Trump, as we always must, Rachel. I personally think that a lot of the evidence that I have seen, admittedly only on social media because there is a complete blackout in mainstream media on Trump's claims of ballot rigging of one form or another, I personally have found a lot of the evidence quite startlingly, alarmingly likely to be true. And yet, one court after another has booted it out the door, and now he's asked his friends on the Supreme Court to intervene. Is he about to find out that they were friends only until he put them in the Supreme Court and they're friends no longer?
Well, George, I don't know that we'll see quite an overturn of the overall election results, but I hear you when you're talking about all of these videos that we keep seeing on social media, all of these claims that things weren't quite right whenever they were either counting ballots or issues with the machines involved with the 2020 election. Now, Trump he's done really well in promoting those claims and in talking about them and everything and bringing them to the surface more so than maybe any other candidate before him. But what he hasn't done really well with is the legal team that he's hired here, right? Because he's got Rudy Giuliani for a minute. He has Sidney Powell. And so he's taken kind of a very strange turn here with this legal team, and they're coming out and they're blaming it on Venezuela or on China, and they're making all of these massive claims. Now, if they are able to prove that, say, the late Hugo Chavez was able to rig the 2020 election in court, then that is absolutely massive, right? But in terms of them actually being able to prove that, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So it's interesting to see how Trump does have a lot of legitimate claims here, but he's sort of mixing it with these off-the-wire, processes of doing it, and then that's kind of shooting him in the foot in the long run.
Now, Joe Biden, quite apart from the cognitive decline, to put it politely, has now broken his ankle. Does he know?
That whole story was so bizarre that they came out and said that he hurt his ankle and then it was his dog and there was some sort of shower involved. I mean, it is a very strange story.
Exactly.
But we still
Let's pause for a moment because this is quite extraordinary. According to Joe Biden, he broke his ankle because coming out of the shower, he pulled his dog's tail. That's quite a tall tail, actually. Do you know what really happened?
I don't. And that is kind of one of those stories that makes you go, wait a second. We're certainly in for a lot for the next 4 years. He's not even in office yet. And yet this is kind of the random thing that we're hearing. So I'm looking forward to some of those speeches that he's going to give over the next couple of years at least.
Kamala has more or less taken over, it seems to me. all the coverage is about her. He's hidden away like an embarrassing elderly relative that can't be counted on not to drool on the cake stand. He is yesterday's man already and not even yet in office. What's your take on her team, which is an all-female team? Should we rejoice?
Well, the media is certainly rejoicing right now and talking about all of the diversity and all of the women who are filling it. And they're, of course, completely ignoring the fact that all of these women and all of these people of color are coming from other places within the establishment. They've served under Bush, they've served under Obama, and what they've learned is exactly how to toe that party line, how not to make too many waves within their party, within their role, and that's what should be the focus right now. And they're saying that it's a good thing because we're coming off of someone like Donald Trump, who's always on Twitter. You never know what he's going to say, but yet they're not looking at the fact that we're going right back to sort of towing that establishment line with all of these cabinet members, with Kamala Harris, and especially the fact that if Joe Biden's not in charge of his presidency, of his administration, then it makes you wonder who is, and that's what we actually need to be looking at here.
The swamp is back, isn't it?
I don't know that the swamp ever left, but yes, we're going through kind of that same exact thing with when Trump was there saying that he was going to end the endless wars, he was going to make all of these changes, and then you look at the cabinet that he appointed and you're saying, wait a second, all of these people would love to start a new war. They would love to keep increasing tensions. So it seems to be more of the same, just with a different person in the Oval Office.
And yet it was the swamp that produced Donald Trump, in the sense that it was people recoiling from decades of the swamp being in power. Is that not likely, therefore, when the inevitable disappointment sets in, to produce either another Donald Trump or a regenerated Donald Trump, if you can imagine that, coming back in the midterms and then coming back in 2024?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it, because we have to remember here, Trump is not going to concede. He's not going to say that he lost. He's not going to give in. What he's going to do is he's going to continue to say that he won the 2020 election, no matter what courts say, no matter how much evidence we find either way. That is what he's going to stick with, because at the end of the day, Trump still received more than 74 million votes. That means there are tens of millions of Americans who are going to continue to believe him, to be ready for some kind of a resurgence in 2024. Now, whether that looks like Trump coming back around and running again, that's a possibility. Or it could also look like someone else in his inner circle, say an Ivanka Trump or a Jared Kushner, trying to throw their hat into the ring and to say that they are the next candidate, that it is either reviving the GOP or, I mean, if the GOP decides that they want to cut ties with Trump, they could decide to do a third party run and to make the MAGA party happen in 2024. There's certainly a lot of options here.
What about the stories we heard that he was breaking with Fox News and he might start his own television channel? Do you think that might happen?
I could certainly see that. I mean, you're talking about someone who has tens of millions of followers on Twitter, of people that interact with him every single day. And we're seeing, sites like Twitter and Facebook clamp down on Trump and his content like never before. And there really is a push for, let's look for other social media outlets, let's look for other news outlets. So I could certainly see him trying to start up some kind of network just to see how far he can get with it. But of course, at the same time, we also have to remember that CNN, Fox News, they're not going to stop covering Trump just because of it, he's out of office. In fact, I would argue that they're going to keep covering him. They're going to keep talking about his tweets and about the ridiculous things that he's going to be doing, because as long as they're covering Trump, then they don't have to cover whatever Joe Biden's doing. It's much more interesting for them to be able to talk about what Trump tweeted at 3 a.m. this morning than it is to have to talk about how the Biden administration just killed so many children in Yemen today, and to actually bring those realities to the American public.
We'll come back to the wars, because we spoke about that, you and I, almost all of last week. But before we leave the domestic, thousands are now dying every day in the United States of the coronavirus. The worst case death toll looks likely to be achieved. There's now mass unemployment of 1930s levels. mass evictions are looming, mass poverty across America. This is an extraordinary combustible mixture, isn't it?
It truly is. And, you list all of those terrible things that have happened, and yet Congress is doing nothing. Nothing. They can't come together to decide on a stimulus check. They can't come together to decide on any kind of relief for the actual American people that they're supposed to be serving. Yet they're able to come together to talk about, the next National Defense Authorization Act that they want to pass to make sure that the military is funded, but they're not able to make sure that the American people are taken care of. And so as we see Biden coming in, there are some talks about, could we see more lockdowns? Could we see some sort of mask mandate? Could he change things up? But the problem that has really accumulated this year so far is that the American people don't trust their government. They don't trust that their government is going to take care of them anyway. So if there is some sort of lockdown mandate, if there are measures taken to try to stop the spread of the coronavirus, then that's when you're likely to see people really taking to the streets and trying to fight back, because they've lost their businesses, their jobs. They can even lose their homes at the end of the year. And there really is a lot of frustration that is now getting to that boiling point of people saying that not only do they not trust the government, but they don't know what the next year looks like for themselves.
Quite so. I think we've reached the end of lockdowns. The patience of people has been stretched to breaking point. I would hate to think what would happen in this country, and we don't have guns or the tendency to take to violent action like we've seen in the United States this year. And making people wear a mask is not going to butter many parsnips when you've got nothing on your plate, on your table, or even maybe a roof over your head, or a job to go to, or any money in your pocket. If that's the extent of Joe Biden's new era on the coronavirus, giving everyone a mask, I don't think that's going to work, Rachel.
Oh, I would agree, absolutely. And I think that we're getting to the point now where when you're talking about millions of Americans who have lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, and everything that we've seen this year, they're fed up with it, they're over it, and they just want some sort of an answer. So that's exactly right. If the government's coming to them and saying, hey, just wear a mask, but sorry, you're losing your home at the end of the month, then that's going to create even more and more tension. And when we're talking about all of the gun owners across the country, they tend to be the ones who are more patient, who are more law-abiding citizens, because they don't want those firearms to be taken away from them. But when you're talking about a case where police are now having to go after people saying, oh, well, you're not wearing a mask or you're not following this and this measure, then that's when you could see some of those fights and even major violence break out. And that has to be the concern there in every portion where the government is looking at what to do to curb the spread of the coronavirus, and in the cases where we're talking about the fact that Congress still hasn't done anything, and yet they're the ones who are still getting their paychecks all the while.
And big paychecks too. There's problems here with the political class. But when I look at the wealth acquired by the likes of Nancy Pelosi, for example, and the share dealings that members of Congress get involved in, we're talking millions at a time, millions of pounds of shares bought and sold. It is quite an extraordinary thing. Now, finally, and I'm grateful for your time, we were fixated all of last week on the danger of events in the Persian Gulf. The fear is real and realistic that Trump wants to go out with a bang, and that bang taking place in the Persian Gulf. I'm not sure he knows just how many bangs would follow that bang, but the danger of the dying days of the Trump administration embroiling the incoming administration in a catastrophic conflict in the Gulf is worth worrying about, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And, Joe Biden is coming in as the first president in 20 years who did not promise to end any wars. We saw Bush, Obama, Trump, they all said they were going to end these wars in the Middle East, that they were going to ramp down on tensions, and that they weren't going to continue to increase the tensions there. And yet Biden is coming in saying he's fine with the U.S. military staying there. And, we've seen these reports saying that Trump is telling members of his cabinet, hey, you can do whatever you want with Iran. You can increase tensions there. Just basically don't start World War III. And that creates a problem when you have people in his cabinet like Mike Pompeo, who have been waiting for some sort of a war to break out for years now. They've been waiting to get to that boiling point where they have to say, oh, well, the U.S. has to get involved because there's nothing else that we can do. So we are certainly watching that area and that region over the coming weeks. And that absolutely is the concern, that the current administration, it's going into a new administration that isn't all that different when it comes to foreign policy. And I would argue there's a major reason why we didn't talk about foreign policy during the presidential debates, because people would see that there's not that much of a difference between the current administration and the one we're going into in terms of where their loyalties lie and how they plan to continue to increase these tensions and to possibly even start yet another war as they go along.
Rachel Blevins, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Wonderful to see you again. Which political statement is acceptable at a football match? Taking the knee, 15%. Wearing a poppy, 56%. None, 29%. 1,000 people have voted already. You can get your vote in on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, Debenhams, one of the, if not the, oldest household name on the British High Street, died last week. Most people thought that coronavirus had killed it, but that wasn't true. As I explained in my RT short, which has been a good one and very well received, very widely watched. Take a look at it now. Debenhams was not killed by COVID. It's important to know that because many other businesses have been. But Debenhams was killed by the asset stripping hedge funds that bought it well over a decade ago. Debenhams, which commanded our high streets since before Napoleon, since before the Battle of Trafalgar, actually since before Admiral Lord Nelson lost one of his eyes. I'm talking more than 220 years. Debenhams has stood proudly on the British High Street, and now it is dead, killed by asset stripping. A group of hedge fund billionaires, some of them British, most of them American, bought at a knockdown price Debenhams almost 20 years ago, and they proceeded to strip it bit by bit of all that was valuable about it. They sold off about 25% of the landmark flagship properties that the company owned, and they pocketed the money. Then they locked the remaining stores into absurdly long 35-year leases at virtually unpayable rent. Rent to whom? Well, to them. They, having bought the company, then leased back the stores to the business. And thus Debenhams was not able to innovate, was not able to play the market in a way that it undoubtedly could have with its high reputation, high-nosed reputation. The business was cheapened into a kind of high street pound shop with cut price offers and splashed with vulgar promotions. Debenhams employs thousands and thousands and thousands of British people, all of whom are now about to be sacked for Christmas. How's that for Santa Claus? These hedge fund billionaires ought to be in jail, but instead they're paying millions of pounds to, I don't know, the Rolling Stones, Elton John, to perform at their birthday parties. These are achingly green billionaires. I'll come back to Sir Philip Green in just a minute. These are the kind of hedge fund billionaires that fly the rainbow flag and always get their pronouns right. But their ruthless, bloodless killing of Debenhams ought never to be forgotten. There's a second reason, of course, why Debenhams has now collapsed, and that's because the Arcadia Group, which owns franchises inside the Debenhams stores, has also collapsed. Sir Philip Green, knighted by that paragon of virtue, Tony Blair, probably tells you all you need to know about him and about Sir Philip Green. Sir Philip Green doesn't own the Arcadia Group, of course. That's helpfully owned by Mrs. Green, who even more helpfully lives on a yacht in Monaco and is not subject, therefore, to any British taxation. The collapse of Arcadia also topples some of the biggest names in British retail. Topshop, Dorothy Perkins. These are names that when I was a boy were king and queen on the high street, and now they are no more. But the issue about Sir Philip Green is not just how he got a knighthood and how he managed to keep it, but how he manages, to the tune of billions, to mix up his money, or rather his wife's money, with the employees' pension money. We're always told there's a black hole in the pension fund. Well, what does that actually mean? It means that the administrator of the pension fund has used the employees' money as if it were their own. How that is legal is beyond me. How it is conduct commensurate with remaining a knight of the realm in Britain, well, that is simply beyond understanding. Time is against me, but I have a solution. Debenhams has got the property. It's got the name. It's got the history. Let's turn it into a worker-operated cooperative. I see you shrugging your shoulders. Like John Lewis, the best of British retail is a workers' cooperative. Imagine. The country should nationalize now this bankrupt chain of department stores. The employees should run them as a temple to the new British age, now that we're coming out of the European Union. A temple in which we display the most innovative, the greatest burst of British creativity since the 1960s and Carnaby Street and the Beatles. You remember those days. We can do it. We have the young people. We have the name. We have the reputation. What we don't need to have are the hedge fund billionaires and the have-yachts living out in Monaco. Let's turn it into a real British home stores, owned by the country, run by the employees. That would be a Christmas gift to the people of Britain.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Now, we are literally waiting for puffs of white smoke over Downing Street to tell us that an agreement has been reached with the European Union. That's how close to the wire we are. It may happen tonight. Equally, it may happen tonight that the talks have completely broken down and the parties have packed their bags and left the negotiation. It matters. If Britain reaches a deal with the European Union, we have to pay them almost £40,000 million in a divorce settlement. We could do a lot with £40 billion rather than give it to the bloated Brussels bureaucracy. But on the other hand, we're told there will be a dislocation at the ports, at the border, if no deal is reached. As I predicted for the last 4 years, is it 4? Yes, it's 4. As I predicted for the last 4 years, European business interests are now in a state of panic at the games being played by the political and bureaucratic leaders in Brussels. Because, of course, whilst it would no doubt be a hardship for me not to be able to buy a Mercedes-Benz, it would be much more of a hardship for Mercedes-Benz if they couldn't continue to sell their product in a market of 65 million people in the sixth most prosperous economy on the earth. And ditto every other product in a huge trade imbalance coming from the European Union to us. And so it's still my bet that a deal will be reached, but it's definitely true that the clock is 1 minute from midnight. And so who better to talk to than the young fogey, Patrick Christys, who has been a powerful voice for Brexit for all the years that I have known him, even though he's only, 21. Patrick Christys, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows.
Hi, George.
What's the latest from Downing Street? You've got your sources.
Yeah, well, the latest, and this has literally just come through to me in the last couple of minutes from some prominent members of the ERG, is that they're expecting Boris Johnson to stick to red lines, which does actually mean potentially that a deal might be drifting away, because I don't see how the European Union will compromise too much on some of their core principles as well. There are three major sticking points at the moment, and it's hard to see how they can be reconciled without serious compromise from either side. And politically speaking, I'm not sure how serious compromise is possible. Fishing rights, state aid, and the ability to seek competitive advantage are the three main areas, although they're all actually slightly interlinked. Just starting with the fishing rights one. Now, this is, of course, a symbolic part of Brexit, but recently people have been keen to point out that it only accounts for 0.1% of the UK economy. Now, I see this as being an exceptionally short-sighted way of looking at things, and so does Boris Johnson, I feel. According to the latest Marine Centre data, UK vessels only account for 32% of fish caught in our own waters. So therefore, if we had total control, not only would it increase our fishing economy, simultaneously, of course, as well, boosting the decimated coastal towns, but it would also ruin the fishing industries of no less than 12 EU member states. So if the EU gives in to Britain's demands, it ruins the fishing industries of 12 of its own nations, which it can't really do. And if Boris gives in to EU demands, then he's betrayed Brexiteers, which he can't really do. Now, on the other issues of state aid and competitive advantage, I think the ability to trade freely and make your own rules and regs and set your own terms is a key element of Boris Johnson's notion of sovereignty, and I suspect most people's notions of sovereignty as well. So he can't settle for too much of a compromise there. Well, will the EU compromise? Now, the EU wants to make leaving Brussels bloc as unpalatable as physically possible. Of course it does. Now, they could therefore not strike a deal that really allowed another nation to demonstrate how independence can lead to prosperity. And this is just something, quickly, George, that is not spoken about enough for me in the British media, the mainstream media. Now, according to the most recent polling data on the EU's own website, you can go and look at this now, 50% of European citizens, quote, feel things aren't going in the right direction with the EU. In fact, only 5% of them could name when the next EU elections were scheduled to take place. In the same document, when asked, is the EU a good thing, only 16 member states could reach a 60% approval rating, and of those, 10 were net benefactors to the European Union, not contributors. So striking a deal with Britain that allows Britain to prosper independently could be a nail in the EU coffin. Now, for those reasons I've just outlined, I find it difficult to see how a deal could be reached this evening. The question is, of course, will Boris sell out?
Well, let's work back through seriatim those issues. We really have reached peak 2020 when a right-wing Conservative government is insisting on its right to give state aid to British industries. And the so-called paragon of social democracy, the EU, is demanding that the Conservatives not be allowed to give state aid to British industries. That's bonkers, isn't it?
Well, it is, but what is bonkers anymore, George? I mean, it is kind of symptomatic of the slightly Orwellian approach that the European Union takes to its politics anyway. I mean, it clearly is the strings are being pulled by the kind of master puppeteer, i.e. George Soros. It is inherently a rather undemocratic and overly bureaucratic organisation that seems to bracket itself as a shining light of democracy in an otherwise dark and bleak existence, while the Conservative Party, of course, is trying to position itself as the party of of independence and freedoms at the same time as simultaneously locking down 99% of the nation. So this is where we are at the moment, of course. But we are on a bit of a knife edge here, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this plans out today. Unless there is serious compromise from either side, basically, then we are going to end up with no deal. On that notion of state aid as well, I mean, I think that clearly is a fundamental principle of an independent nation, to be able to bolster, free from regulations, its own industries and its own businesses, essentially.
Absolutely, and I'm 100% on that point, as you'd imagine. Now, whilst the fishing industry may be a small percentage of the total British economy, it's 100% of the economy of fishing communities.
Yeah.
These derelict coastal communities that have been robbed blind for 40 years by industrialized trawlers hoovering up 2/3 of British fishing stocks. Now, as you rightly say, once we are in control of our own waters, we can catch more fish, we can sell more fish, and we can eat more fish. That would be a very good idea, by the way, in these days of fearing red meat and so on. We all should eat more fish. We are an island that eats remarkably little fish. But in Scotland, the fishing communities that I hope to be a voice for in the coming years desperately need control back over our own waters. You can't take back control unless you take back control of your own seas, can you?
No, you absolutely can't. And this is why I said that the 0.1% argument is an incredibly short-sighted one, because not only will that just boost massively, so that's out of the water already, when you factor it in as well to what our foreign aid budget is, that's 0.7%. That's a heck of a lot of money. So, it is still a huge amount of money, but it's the ripple effect, isn't it? And it is the fact that if you kind of start to boost our coastal communities, as you rightly said, which were absolutely decimated by our agreement with the European Union there, and that was a key element of prioritising foreign citizens over your own, which I know that a lot of Brexiteers clearly disdain. The ripple effect there is if you kind of reboost those areas, not only do they have an industry there and they have more money coming in, but they become more palatable areas to live. And there are areas there significantly in need of renovation. In fact, it's no disrespect, and I certainly mean no disrespect to a lot of our fishing communities, to say that they are some of the areas in this country most in need of drastic renovation, actually. And they could become more palatable places to live, more palatable places to do business. And especially when the Conservative government has been talking about things like a northern powerhouse, well, a good way to do that is to make those areas attractive places to live, work and do business. And by reinvigorating the British fishing industry, it's clear that we can do that. In fact, it's a bit of a gift, actually. Also, fundamentally, just to come back to just the very core of this about whether or not we're going to get a deal, I just don't see how on earth Boris Johnson, who has just faced a 55 MP rebellion on his latest COVID restrictions, could now alienate even more numbers of his party by selling out the fishing communities that he seemed to hold dear and that indeed most Brexiteers hold dear. So it is a vital issue, not just for this country, but not just for Boris Johnson, but for the country as a whole. And just quickly on that as well, it's the leverage that we've got against the EU here. There are 12 member states whose basically entire fishing industry rely on pillaging our waters. Some of them doing it in very environmentally unfriendly ways, by the way, using electroshock methods there as well, which are undignified and unpalatable. Well, actually, if we can essentially prioritise our own waters there and be decimating those industries, the EU, we have got them over a barrel, haven't we?
Well, it makes the point that if this is such an insignificant industry, why are the French and the Dutch so desperate to hold on to their share of it?
Exactly that. People are saying, well, it's only 0.1% of our economy. Fine, well, surely the EU would just give us that then, wouldn't they? And we can move on and maybe we would then compromise on things like seeking competitive advantage. The fact is they've been trying to underplay how vital that is for them. And as I mentioned earlier as well, the Brussels bloc is not actually deeply popular with its own citizens. And if you throw into the mix there in places that are already volatile, let's be honest with you, like Italy and places like that, and Portugal to an extent, if you ruin their fishing in parts of Spain, of course, if you we've ruined their fishing industries, then sorry, all of a sudden the Eurosceptic voices start to clamour even louder, and people will start to think, hang on a minute, what are we really in this for? It is a massive, massive area of compromise for the European Union, but whether or not the kind of EU negotiators, the likes of the Michel Barniers of this world, who certainly adopt a very centralised European outlook, whether they actually recognise that. And that would be an example, really, of, I think, a lot of the places where the European Union has maybe gone wrong in its optics and its messaging over the period of time, which is that actually, does it care about all of its citizens, or does it just care about the ones it chooses to, the ones that are slightly more landlocked, a bit closer to Brussels, and a little bit more bureaucratic? Does it actually care about the little people who, of course, it's already hung out to dry? Just ask the Italians about how that feels, you know?
Now, lastly, and I'm grateful for your time as always, Patrick, you mentioned the rebellion, 55 Tories voting against their own government. But of course, in this case, because I must laughingly refer to him as the leader of the opposition, is going to abstain on this deal, even though the issue of Brexit was so important, he was ready to destroy Labour's electoral chances last year. Boris Johnson may require to rely on the support, at least passive support, of Labour MPs to get any deal through if he does sell out. What would be the medium-term consequences of that for Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, I think it would be absolutely disastrous. I mean, you did mention there the 55 rebellion MPs that we face there. Now, also, it goes deeper than that, because in Cabinet are Jacob Rees-Mogg and Suella Braverman, of course, who are prominent members of the ERG, the European Research Group. Now, one of the main reasons why I suspect we're not going to get a deal, actually, is I think if he was going to sell out, we'd have heard some serious noises from them by now. If he does sell out, they will resign. And so Boris would face not only a rebellion from the backbenchers within his own party, he'd face a rebellion within Cabinet as well, but he would also face a rebellion from Brexiteers across the country, many of whom live in the red wall areas, who've already been worst affected by his COVID restrictions. So that seems like essentially Boris Johnson signing off a bad deal would be him signing his political suicide note. It's no surprise to me that the Labour Party is planning an abstention on this. Keir Starmer seems to do nothing but sit on the fence at the moment. It is, as you rightly said, laughable that he calls himself an opposition. Still, no one has got any danger whatsoever of finding out what he thinks on any of the key issues. At least with Jeremy Corbyn, who a lot of people, clearly did find unpalatable at the last election just based on the result. At least you knew where he stood on stuff, right? For the most part, anyway. Now, with Keir Starmer, you don't. I think Boris Johnson, it's not going to be enough for him, even if he could push this Brexit deal through, if there's a compromise there. Even if he could push it through with the support of some Labour MPs, that simply would not be enough for him to survive as leader of the Conservative Party and therefore as Prime Minister. There's too much going on there for him.
So it could provoke a leadership challenge?
I firmly believe so. I firmly believe so, because as Theresa May found out to her peril, once the backbenchers get the taste of rebellion, it's very hard to get that out of their mouths. And actually, if you're looking at it now, you're thinking, what does Boris Johnson stand for? We thought he stood for freedom and liberty. Well, he's managed to remove that from essentially 99% of the nation, to the disdain of many of the backbenchers and to the absolute peril, frankly, of a lot of the MPs who are in those red wall seats that the Conservatives won at the last election. They may already be out in the views of the electorate there. And if Boris Johnson then sells out on Brexit as well, essentially the clamour would be, you've lied to us from start to finish about the man that you were and the politics that you were promising. And you become untenable when you do that.
Boris Johnson telling lies. Who'd have thought it? Patrick Christys, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Lots of stuff coming in here on Trump. Numbers are a mathematical system that doesn't lie. I don't believe that American citizens cannot count, George. Not sure what that means, Jeff. Why don't you call and explain? Phil says, USA, another empire on the failing. And Helen says, every election is rigged in the UK as well. And Greg says, all state election oversight boards, state and federal judges say no evidence of fraud. One big conspiracy, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And Ben says the US is no longer a democracy, totally in the hands of the deep state and corrupt elites. If the Dems can rig their own primaries As Elizabeth Warren believed in 2016, they are capable of rigging elections. And George says America is done. They steal an election, tell the people that they didn't, and the half-wits believe them, even though it is right in their face. And Ali says Trump has raised $170 million and counting for a legal fund. Trump is putting that money in his pocket. Trump is a thief. Don't donate to him. Well, as Twitter might say, that claim is disputed. Tony says the best thing that sleepy Joe Biden can do is stop his corrupt Democrats from destroying the whole United States economy. It's time for the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Post-Brexit trade negotiations between the United Kingdom and the European Union are in a very difficult position, according to a senior British government cabinet minister, who said that the country is still ready to keep negotiating until there is no point in doing so any further. Environment Secretary George Eustice said progress was being made, but the EU had added a whole load of additional demands, which created problems. Negotiators are returning to the table in what has been called a final throw of the dice to strike a deal, as former Prime Minister Gordon Brown warned of an economic war with Europe and the US if one cannot be reached. Eustice said that the UK is prepared to make some agreements on the so-called level playing field, but argued that the EU must treat the UK as a sovereign power. However, there were still sticking points on fishing and business rules remaining. One of the disagreements is over access to UK waters by the EU's fishing fleets, an issue which erupted last week, with the UK accusing the EU of making extra last-minute demands. Another is what measures there should be to enable a level playing field for businesses on both sides. If a deal is not reached, border checks and taxes will be introduced for goods travelling between the UK and the EU at the end of the year. The National Health Service will begin what it has deemed the largest rollout ever of a vaccine in UK history on Tuesday, according to the Department of Health. Frontline health staff, people over the age of 80 and care home workers will be the first to get the COVID-19 vaccine. In England, 50 hospitals have been initially chosen to serve as hubs for administering the vaccine. Refrigerated containers holding the vaccine doses have been arriving in the UK from Belgium and are being prepared to be moved from secure locations to hospitals. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will also begin their vaccination programmes from hospitals on Tuesday. The streaming service Netflix says it will not warn viewers of The Crown that some of the scenes are fiction. Responding to calls for a warning from Britain's Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, the company has said the series has always been billed as a drama, and as a result they have no plans and see no need to add a disclaimer. Dowden had said earlier that younger viewers may mistake fiction for fact when watching the fourth series, which shows the breakdown of the marriage between the Prince and Princess of Wales. The Crown's creator, Peter Morgan, has called the show an act of creative imagination. Roald Dahl's family has apologised for anti-Semitic comments made by the best-selling author who died in 1990. A statement condemning Dahl's controversial comments made in two interviews in 1983 and 1990 were published on his official website. In a discreet part of the site, his family and the Roald Dahl Story Company deeply apologised for the lasting and understandable hurt caused. The statement reads, "It said his prejudiced remarks stand in marked contrast to the man that they knew." Roald Dahl first made anti-Semitic comments in an interview with The New Statesman in 1983, and 7 years later in the piece for The Independent, the author acknowledged he had become anti-Semitic. In 2018, the Royal Mint chose not to issue a commemorative coin on the 100th anniversary of his birth because of his anti-Semitic views. Dahl's novels include Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda and the BFG. All have been adapted for the big screen. US President Donald Trump has held his first rally after losing the US presidential election. The event in Georgia comes before key Senate runoff elections there in January, which will decide the control of the upper house. Trump has repeatedly refused to admit his defeat and made numerous unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. Ahead of the rally, he criticised Georgia's Republican governor on Twitter, calling on him to help overturn Joe Biden's election victory in the state. Biden will take office on the 20th of January, regardless of whether Trump admits defeat. Residents of a coastal resort town on a popular Australian holiday island have been told to leave immediately by authorities as a bushfire worsens. Firefighters are struggling to control the huge fire on Fraser Island off the east coast of Queensland. The bushfire was sparked by an illegal campfire in mid-October and has destroyed at least 82,000 hectares of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. A heatwave in southeast Australia has exacerbated bushfire conditions. The Fraser Island fires are among the most serious since the end of last summer, and Australia's 2019-2020 bushfire season was its most intense on record, though not its most deadly. Venezuelans are today choosing the 277 members of the National Assembly in an election which is being boycotted by most opposition parties who've denounced it as a fraud. The election comes amid a 2-year power struggle between sitting President Nicolas Maduro and opposition leader Juan Guaido. The National Assembly, with Guaido at its helm, is the only institution not controlled by Maduro's socialist PSUV party, but that is almost certain to change in this election. And finally, chess is enjoying an unprecedented boost in popularity because of lockdown and the success of the hit TV show The Queen's Gambit. Set in the 1960s, it follows the story of fictional child prodigy Beth Harmon, who rises to become a grandmaster in the male-dominated world of chess. Garry Kasparov, the former chess world champion and one of the sport's greatest players, acted as a consultant on the show to ensure authenticity. He said the show refuted the image of the game of chess as something that could turn you into a nerd or just make you crazy. According to the International Chess Federation, in the 10 days following the release of The Queen's Gambit, searches for the words chess set on eBay surged 273%. That's a search every 6 seconds. The Federation said that following the show's release on October 23rd, in the middle of the COVID lockdown, chess has enjoyed a huge surge in online interest. At the beginning of 2020, up to 11 million games of chess were played online every day. After lockdown, this number had increased by up to 17 million, while these platforms recorded an increase in 40% of new accounts registered. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, the first poll is running until 9 o'clock. Which political statement is acceptable at a football match? Taking the knee, wearing a poppy, or none? You can vote. 1,500 of you already have on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, over the last 5 years, hundreds of thousands of Yemenis have died, either directly as a result of acts of war by a coalition led by Saudi Arabia, the richest country in the Middle East, against the poorest country in the Middle East, indeed now one of the poorest countries in the entire world. Well, you may think these are far-off countries of which we know little, except that we sold £5 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia in those same 5 years. Dominic Raab this week increased UK aid to Yemen, bringing the sum total up over that 5 years to $1 billion. So British companies are earning $5 billion, selling the means of destroying Yemen, while the British taxpayer is giving $1 billion in Band-Aid and coffins for those that didn't make it through. You really couldn't make it up. It's like something out of Catch 22, as I wrote on RT.com this very week on this very subject. The people, of course, are not just dying from the bombs and the rockets and the bullets. They're dying of famine, literal famine. of malnutrition. They're dying of cholera. They're dying of the coronavirus. They are being swept by wave after wave of illness and sickness and disease, which, of course, accompanies wholesale slaughter on this scale. And we are not just selling the weapons. British and American officers are in the command and control centers in Saudi Arabia, helping Saudi Arabia's Air Force to direct its fire on the people of Yemen. In fact, although Parliament was never informed, no statement from the government was ever made, it was revealed last week that we have British troops standing on the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. We are guarding the unfreest dictatorship on the earth in the so-called Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the people who are paying the most immediate and most bloody cost are the poor people of Yemen. Formerly, of course, where wasn't formerly, of course, a British colony. Now, Nasih Shakar is a journalist, a brave one, working on the front line in Yemen. He started his journalistic career right at the beginning of this war. Talk about baptism by fire. Nasih Shakar joins me now, I hope, on the line from Sana'a in Yemen. Mr. Shakar, thank you for joining us. Have I described the situation in your country accurately?
Well, thank you very much, George, for having me. The situation in Yemen is moving from the bad to worse. Since 2015, the Saudi-led coalition started a war in Yemen supported by the United States and America, while Yemeni political factions were about to reach a deal under the auspices of the United Nations with its envoy to Yemen, Jamal Omar. But the intervention in Yemen exacerbated and prevented Yemenis from reaching a deal. We know that only Yemeni dialogue or inclusive dialogue can put an end to the war in Yemen. Not Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a bad history. Saudi Arabia is looking at Yemen and the Yemenis as arch enemies. Saudi Arabia is waging war, or this is not the first war for Saudi Arabia in Yemen. We know that since the establishment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it waged a war against Yemen in 1934. With the Saudi king, or the founding of Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz bin Saud, he fought war with Yemen. And since 2000, he established with the former dictator of Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. We know Jizan, Ashir, and Najran. These regions are disputed regions with Yemen because these regions were part of the Greater Yemen. Yemen is a pretty large country to the southern part of Mecca, the Kaaba. The southern corner of Kaaba were belonging to the Yemenis. That's why Yemen is called Yemen, because Yemen means the south of the Mecca. And the north, which is Sham, which is Syria, is called the north or the Sham because it's toward the north of Kaaba. So the situation in Yemen is exacerbating, and only Yemeni dialogue can end the conflict in Yemen. Most Saudi Arabia, most the mercenaries that bring from Blackwater, from Sudan, from Pakistan, from different countries.
Now, British people, certainly those of a certain age, remember when Britain fought a bloody war in Aden against the independence forces, the NLF, the National Liberation Front. What is the situation in Aden today?
Well, to be honest with you, the British ambassador to Yemen, Michael Aaron, is working very hard to separate Yemen, because part of the deal between that put Yemen into this situation is that Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi was looking forward dividing Yemen into different countries, into different regions. Sorry, they wanted Yemen to be a federal state, not the unified Yemen. So they are saying that we are against the secessionists in South Yemen, but in fact they are working day and night to divide Yemen into different groups. They are now, the coalition of the Saudi-backed government it has several components, several factions. They are fighting. There is infighting in Aden. The separatists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Islah Party, General People Congress, a lot of factions. Now there is Al-Mahara. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, there was an attack on a ship, on a operating ship of Al-Mahara province, which is east bordering state of Oman. That attack was of Al-Mahara province, which is came in wake of 3 days from the visit by the U.S. ambassador to Yemen. This is the first visit for him since the war broke out. So the state in Aden is very bad. There is infighting, there is murdering, there is assassination. There is no electricity. There are different factions fighting with each other. And the United Arab Emirates is very happy with this, because all these factions are backed and supported financially by the United by the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, State of Kuwait, Bahrain, those countries who were fighting the Abdullah Saleh regime when he fought the 1994 war against the secessionists. All these countries were supporting the secessionists, but failed. Now they are trying to support this, but they don't want it to be officially. They want to normalize the relations with Israel. If the secessionists in the south of Yemen are going to normalize relations with Israel, they are going to recognize and call a referendum to divide the south from the north. But this will not happen. We know the situation is very bad. They are not the government in Aden. They are very weak country. They are very weak authorities there. Can you imagine when US dollar is equals 900 Yemeni riyal? But in Sana'a, where they are calling the National Salvation Government as a rebel state, the $1 is equals 600 Yemeni riyal, even under that. So you cannot believe that where Sana'a is under blockade, under siege, there is no incomes, there is no salaries, but they are very powerful and very strong economically on every side. There is no assassinations, there is a stable state. We are just receiving bombs from the air. So the situation in Sana'a is better than in Aden, which is under those who are supporting the so-called internationally recognized government. But we know that it is in the interest of the international community to recognize the authorities on the ground in Sana'a, not the government that is ruling Yemen from remote, from hotels outside in Egypt or in Cairo or in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi.
Where is the British ambassador to Yemen?
You know, Michael Aaron is chattering between Riyadh and Jordan.
The British ambassador to Yemen is living in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan. It's a bad line, Nasi. I'll have to leave it at that. I hope we've given people a flavour of who's who and what's what in the situation there in Yemen. Let me read another couple of the stuff that's coming in. Brian says, Trump is and always has been a useful deflection from Washington's own corruption, which you won't read about. And Marwan says, Biden grabbing his dog's tail coming out of the shower might be a cover story. More likely is that Kamala Harris's booby trap didn't quite go according to plan. And Bernardo says, don't you think that Trump is using a lot of fake news about rigged elections and ballots until one sticks? In this ocean of lies, one has to be true. And in response to the poll, Mike says there should be no political or militaristic involvement in football. And Scott says, given the BLM movement is more than a statement against racism, and they've been displaying political slogans and political ideals. Anything to do with BLM should be banned from football. After all, FIFA and UEFA rules dictate no political statements allowed. Poppies are not political, says Scott. Peter says politics should not feature in any way in the game of football. And Polly says, personally, I'd prefer no politics in the beautiful game, as it should be a thing of freedom. Poppy is about respect. I'm always cool for respect, as it's sadly missing in this horrible real world. And James says all are acceptable. None should be mandated, nor should the spectators be sanctioned for their reaction. If you bring politics onto the pitch, expect a political reaction in the stands. Let me take a quick 2-minute break. Count them.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. So what exactly are you on here telling me? That it's not infectious?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy.
Right. Well, I'm going to quote Doctor, and he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You know, you can watch it for yourself.
Yeah. You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities. I can trust them, or I can go with wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not.
Wee Ben on YouTube.
I am not on the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. Look, you started out by saying COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile nonsense.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Okay, we're taking your calls in just a few minutes' time. Here's the number. If you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both. Now, here's the spot where I look back at our history in the 7 days which shaped the future for good and bad in this, the week. The last few days here have been chilly, but nothing like in this week in 1952, when parts of Britain were covered in smog, freezing fog mixed with fog. They used to call these pea soupers. A thick layer which covered London for 3 days began spreading all over the country. Leeds recorded its highest ever level of sulfur dioxide in the air, and pneumonia cases in Glasgow trebled. In response to the smog, the Clean Air Act was introduced in 1956, when the EU was still the European Coal and Steel Community. We introduced Europe's first Clean Air Act. In 1969, 300,000 people attended the Altamont free concert in California featuring the Rolling Stones, which was policed by Hell's Angels and ended in violence and 4 deaths. In this week in 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela. And such is his power that long after his death, Donald Trump is accusing him of rigging the American election in 2020. And on this very day, in 2005, David Cameron became the new Conservative leader by a margin of more than 2-1 over David Davis. Whatever became of him? Does anybody actually care? A day later, in 1941, and in perhaps the most ill-advised military move of the 20th century, Japan launched a surprise attack on American bases in the Pacific, including Pearl Harbor, and declaring it was at war with Britain and the United States. And we know the ending to that one. And it was in this week, in December 1955, that Clement Attlee stepped down as leader of the opposition Labour Party, following months of speculation. He had, of course, been Prime Minister and had, among other achievements, presided over the creation of the National Health Service, one of the greatest things to have happened to us here in Britain. He also became the first Labour leader to accept an hereditary peerage, so he wasn't perfect. If I'm not wrong, his progeny, maybe grandchildren now, went over to the Conservative Party at some point in the quite recent past. In 1978, The Deer Hunter, directed by Michael Cimino and starring Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and Meryl Streep, premiered in Los Angeles. Wonderful movie. This is the week in 1980, and I remember it so well that the former Beatle John Lennon was shot dead by Mark Chapman, who opened fire outside the musician's New York apartment. John Lennon was shot 4 times in the back by the man who only hours earlier had asked for his autograph. On December 9th in 1973, tripartite talks on Northern Ireland ended in an historic agreement to set up a Council of Ireland in what became known as the Sunningdale Agreement. The British Prime Minister, Edward Heath, Irish Premier Liam Cosgrave, and representatives of the Ulster Unionist Party, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, and the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland signed the agreement at Sunningdale, Berkshire. The executive took over the government of Northern Ireland on the 1st of January 1974. Hardliners such as the Democratic Unionists, Reverend Ian Paisley, saw the deal as a sellout. The majority of Ulster Unionists agreed, and an Ulster Workers' Council strike crippled power supplies and the delivery of goods. Loyalist paramilitaries became involved in enforcing blockades, the institutions collapsed, and London imposed direct rule. And in this week, in 1960, Coronation Street was broadcast for the first time on TV, and it's still going. I don't know how many nights a week. I've never actually seen it, believe it or not, in the intervening 60 years. But I did see a reference to one of its stars saying this week that actually Coronation Street could run forever. It's a sobering thought. In 1992, US troops arrived in Somalia in a bid to aid thousands of starving people, they said. The American Marines landed just before dawn, but their peace mission came to symbolize failure after a heavy firefight in October 1993 left 18 US troops dead and around 90 injured. They made a film around it called Watership Down, although I may not have got that quite right. A mysterious epidemic among homosexual men was discovered in this week in 1981 in the United States. The then unknown condition, which consisted of two separate diseases, a form of pneumonia and skin cancer, had been found in 180 patients in 15 states since the previous July. It was, of course, eventually named as AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome virus. It spread quickly, and not just through gay people, but throughout the planet. More than 30 million people have died and continue to die from it. Just ponder that. In 2016, Bob Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature at a ceremony he did not attend in Stockholm. No surprise there. The only one was that it had taken them so long to do it. Bob Dylan, of course, being the greatest writer in the English language since William Shakespeare. Following the Pearl Harbor attack in this week in 1941, Hitler and Mussolini announced that they too were at war with America, which retaliated with its own declaration of war on the forces of savagery and barbarism. This was the turning point in World War II, although no one knew that then. Also in this week, in 1979, the 14 years of the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI, in Rhodesia came to an end. The Zimbabwe-Rhodesian Parliament voted itself out of office and handed power back to the British until democratic elections could take place. And finally, in 1967, Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones, the man who founded the band and was its leader until Mick Jagger took over, had a 9-month jail sentence for drugs overturned at the Court of Appeal in London. 2 years later, he split with the Stones, quoting musical differences. What else? The blonde, blue-eyed Brit wanted to pursue his love for rhythm and blues. It was at this time that he also bought a 15th century Sussex farmhouse where A.A. Milne is said to have written Winnie the Pooh. In July that year, in 1969, Brian Jones was found dead in the swimming pool. What a 7 days that was. That was indeed the week that was. The poll is running. What political statement is acceptable at a football match? A, taking the knee, 14%. B, wearing a poppy, 58%. None, 28%. 1,620 people have voted. Get your vote in now before that poll comes to an end. Breaking news, we're just hearing that Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has tested positive for coronavirus. Tweet has just trumped this news to his online audience and sent his best wishes to Giuliani on Twitter. This comes just 2 weeks after Giuliani's son tested positive for the virus. Let's go to the United States now, to Clarksville. Last train to Clarksville, it's Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
Hello, George.
Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Thanks for the opportunity here to talk to you and all your listeners. I've talked to you before. I'm interested in the People's Party, or I say the, but I'm speaking generically. I don't know that we actually have one that exists yet.
No, not yet.
But what I'm interested in is, I hope as many people out there of a similar mind will keep their minds open, as I'm trying to do. This party does not need to be just a break-off of the left side of the Democratic Party, because that will not work. I see that we should have, in my mind, we should have common ground with a lot of those people who voted for Trump, the blue-collar people who are left out, their manufacturing jobs went away. And a People's Party, if we stress the right issues, should be a broad spectrum, bringing in people from both sides of the political spectrum. And we have to get past Trump. He's going to be gone. And I think we have to show respect to Trump supporters. There are 70-some million of them. And we have to try to get our fair share of those who see eye to eye on such things as trade unionism, ways to bring back American manufacturing, a higher minimum wage, benefits for all people that help working people, such as national health insurance, a good program, and improving Social Security and retirement. That would help everybody at a working level. I can see people who may be on the left, maybe young millennials without a whole lot of money, and Trump voters who were the white, non-college educated, kind of left out manufacturing types. We need to pursue policies and come up with ideas that make a way for these people to be successful back into the American way of life, and a chance to get to a prosperous middle class. One way of doing that, I think, would be an FDR-style infrastructure program. We have the American commercial freight system is very important to our economy, but the infrastructure is very crumbling and very neglected. And that would be one point to spend some money, some taxpayers' money in a good way, as FDR did. Let's never forget that FDR used socialism to save capitalism. A lot of capitalists don't want to believe that, but that is true.
I mean, that's an exceptionally well-argued analysis, Richard. I agree with every word of it. The movement for a People's Party must not be plastered in hammer and sickle and red stars and pose with the kind of leftist rhetoric that much of the left is devoted to. It must not be a continuation of woke, liberal identity politics, as so many people on what they think of as the left in the United States are and do. It must be genuinely People's Party, speaking directly to the objective needs of the mass of the American people, who are working class people, who are people dependent on their wages, on their salaries to live, millions of whom no longer have wages or salaries. Objectively, I believe that will take them in a leftward direction, but they mustn't not be prepared to get onto the train. They have to be enticed onto the train. And the best way to do that is with the kind of program for the material needs of the working people, as you described them, to be offered by this new People's Party. I would add that an important part of the People's Party program must be an end to the United States making war against other peoples everywhere else in the world. And that too can be something that can appeal to many of the working class voting base that put Trump in power 4 years ago. Now, Richard,
George,
go on. Last word.
Yes.
Last word.
Yes, George, you actually you hit on my next point. My next point was going to be the other major area that people across this political spectrum could have in common is to stop stupid foreign wars and avoid future wars and use that money. Well, first of all, from a moral standpoint, that's what we should do. And I think people would respond to the fact that we respect our soldiers enough not to put them in harm's way for such stupid ideas, and that money can be much more better used to rebuild things in this country. And the other part about foreign policy, I mentioned trade unionism. I think we need to make it an international kind of a program or an attempt to, if you help one worker anywhere in the world, I think you help all workers, and that's one way to do something about wages that are so low that it's hard for Americans or possibly British workers to compete with. If we can rise up the wages, the benefits all around the world, if we can use that as the American foreign policy to try to support workers in every corner of the world, like I said, to help one worker helps all workers everywhere on this planet.
Now, Richard, speaking of trains and Clarksville, you sound just old enough to know what that song was about. Would you explain it succinctly?
Yeah, well, wasn't that Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart? I think those are the guys involved. And we actually had a restaurant here for a while. Of course, they all fail with their situation now. But we had a restaurant here called Last Train in Clarksville. But I don't think Clarksville, Georgia was the Clarksville involved. There's a Clarksville in Tennessee and others. But beyond that, I'd have to defer to you, George. I really don't know the whole story. I'm curious myself.
The song Last Train to Clarksville, and I'll meet you at the station.
Yeah.
It was the place from which the American soldiers flew off to Vietnam. So when you said you were catching the last train to Clarksville, it meant you were bound for the Vietnam War or the American War on Vietnam. Richard, thanks very much indeed. Let's hear from Eve in Idaho. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello, George. Thank you to have me on. First, I want to talk about the election, but what your previous caller say is absolutely accurate. There is a strong movement of anti-war, pro-middle class, which is on the left and on the right, and they should find a way to get together. Now, about the election, I have a slight disagreement with your opening, in the sense that you say Trump was cheated, and I completely agree, but he cannot prove. And I believe that he proved it in Georgia, and he essentially proved it in Pennsylvania, because we know now that there was 1.8 million absentee ballots sent, and 2.5 million came back. So there is 700,000, which we don't know where they're coming from. In addition, an election from a mathematical point of view, is to establish a one-to-one mapping between a bunch of ballots and a real population. As long as you have not checked for the signature and everything which allow to do this mapping, you have not verified the election, and it takes a long time. And contrary to what Rachel was saying, I think they have been pretty smart, because when you look at the beginning of the story, they had people like Sidney Powell, who talk about Nicaragua, Venezuela, China. She was all over the place. It did not make any sense. And that was a very good way to let the CNN and so on going on those tracks, because what we have to do is to get those 1,000 affidavits with very, very precise things. And this work needed to be done. And you can see now that it's coming out.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with what you say. I don't speak for Rachel, of course. But the point I was making, that he failed to prove it to the satisfaction of a court, which would have been the only way of overturning the result.
No, I think that I talked to you, but 3 or 4 weeks ago about it, is that he knows that local court will just say, look, don't ask us, because this is our livelihood. There are two avenues for you: is the Supreme Court or the legislature. That's it. We know that from the beginning. And in fact, if you look at the local court, they could have wasted his time. They could have said, well, we're going to look into it and all that. They didn't. They threw away the thing. They say, we can't do it. That I don't think is, I think that what we are going to see is a legislature or Supreme Court. Those are the two who can change the,
And what? Give me a percentage possibility. What percentage possibility is there at this stage of Donald Trump beginning a second term in January rather than Joe Biden being sworn in?
Okay, I think in the country right now, I would say it's about 10%. For me, I think that Trump will be there the 22nd of January. I think he's going anywhere because he has now to defend the integrity of the election. I am a big fan of biology and so on, and humankind has been alive for 2 million years, 3 million years, and only for 300 years we had, starting with the British, like the Magna Carta and this notion of one vote, one man. This is a gigantic achievement, which is very fragile. It was only there for 300 years. So I think he's not going to let it go. And he has the means, really, of staying in power. He can do limited martial law. He can do a lot of things. And I don't think he's going anywhere.
Well, make a date to phone me right after the inauguration, and we'll talk further about this. Thank you very much, Yves. Now, as I said earlier, to much hilarity with my clever friends through the glass, I am, finally you may say, in a pantomime. I can't tell you the part I'm playing in that pantomime, but it's a significant one. But not only am I in it, some of the biggest names in sport are in it too. It's star-studded, and it's all been put together by the man that runs the Scottish Premiership football team, Hamilton Academicals. What a wonderful name for a football team. Usually known as Hamilton Accies, but their proper name, their Sunday name, is Hamilton Academicals. And his name is Colin McGowan. He runs charities that help the most cursed and stricken children in the land of Scotland, which has one of the worst drug problems anywhere in Europe. In fact, my own home city of Dundee is the drugs death capital of Europe. Imagine that. Colin McGowan is the chief executive of Hamilton Academical FC, trustee of the children's charity Blameless, that helps support children with addict parents. And Colin is the man that put this panto together. You are the Cecil B. DeMille of pantomimes. Tell us, first of all, what the pantomime's going to be about and how it came to your mind to hold such a thing and to recruit me to it.
Well, it's Jack and the Beanstalk, and I think that it's very, very important to, for the families at this time of the year. Pantomimes away, like the children's charity Blameless. Every year we take 120 families to see it, and Spectrum Properties is one of the companies that help fund that at the Christmas times, and they've been very good. And so we've enjoyed taking them there for years, and now there's a lot of families are going to miss that. And I've heard so many times the theatres shutting and not opening due to the COVID restrictions. So I came up with the idea it would be good if we could live stream it on Panto Live 2020 and put it right into the living rooms, and then we set up using our specialist friends QTV, Jack McGill and Streamline, Paul Ananello. These are specialists that have it. And then we converted the part of the stadium into a studio that allows us to do many direct things if this COVID is with us. So it took a wee while. The great people that have managed to, the top sportsmen, the Celtic captain, Rangers captain, your good self. That came about.
What about? Isn't there a top boxer involved?
Yeah. I think you know that Tyson Fury is doing a bit, and I've been very, very fortunate. There's a few of the football agents got a very soft spot for Hamilton Accies, and I was telling them and asking them what they could do, and they've been brilliant with supporting the charities over the years. And I asked them if they could get, and they said, "Oh, leave it with us." And to be fair, all the lads have said yes right away. And I know they've all got their own challenges and their different their COVID stuff, but they're going to be doing all their filming and getting it into as your good self. Didn't need to be asked twice, and that's your part is top secret, along with another couple of cameos. So it's going to be really exciting, and I hope that and it's a really, really good production, and the specialist effects in it and the different things. It's a real quality production. It's sort of grew arms and legs with beanstalks and Daisy the cow and all the different things. So it's going to be pretty spectacular. I think people will be quite surprised at the quality, and the Gary King of the Go Kids, the young Gary King Jr. is an amazing man technically, and he's been everybody. It's the specialist help I've brought in. I've had the idea and I've had the vision, but I couldn't do it without all these great, wonderful people that's given their time. It's not just me. I'm only putting the people with the expertise together, but it's going to be fabulous. I hope it's.
Don't talk your own role down, because getting Celtic and Rangers on the same team is a terrific achievement. But the work you do with Blameless, I've interviewed you before, long ago actually, about them. Just explain what Blameless does, would you?
Blameless is a children's charity, and we support the children that when their parents are going into meaningful recovery. At the stadium, we're able to accommodate Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and Gamblers Anonymous. And more recently, in the past few years, Families Anonymous, which is a magnificent fellowship that supports not just they support the family members that are non-addicts that are living with the addicts. A magnificent fellowship. That's Family Anonymous. And the children, now these are all standalone, unaffiliated, unaffiliated with each other. These are standalone charities, and that's no cost to councils and no cost to the government. These are magnificent volunteers that go out there, and they're all, alcoholics and addicts themselves. They know and then they have children, and when they're entering early recovery, we're able to give that bit of support. The football club, many families come on Saturdays and watch the games, and it gets them that wee bit of quality time, because there's a lot of mental health issues among many other problems. So I absolutely love it. It's a very much a passion, and and see, when you see a family getting into recovery, it's marvellous. And Hamilton Accies is sort of leading the way and accommodating all the fellowships, and it's working great. It's a great model.
Hamilton Accies is a remarkable club. And it came, to be honest with you, because I've been away for a while, though I'm back in Scotland now, it amazed me that you've taken Hamilton Accies from the very bottom right into the Premier Division and kept them there for 7 years. This has made a huge improvement in the lives of local people and in the local economy. And therefore, it was a bit of a shock to me to see that the local authorities have done you a bad turn recently. Tell us about that.
Well, we could firstly on the football issue. I've got an unbelievable board of directors: Ronnie McDonald, Alan Maitland, George Cairns, Les Gray. They look after all the football side. And it's 10 years in the Premiership with 7 years consecutively. And these men have got 200 years of football experience, and they've done that. The council, South Lanarkshire Council leaving. I can only say that the only word I could find is that's a betrayal of the people of South Lanarkshire.
When you say leaving, explain what you mean.
Well, they're giving up the lease on the 21st of next year.
Their lease being they leased part of the stadium.
They've leased the North Stand for the past 20 years. Now that was a strategical partnership, or more betterly put, a social compact. The deal there, and this. I'll take me a moment to explain this. The deal was that the South Lanarkshire Council would rent from the stadium company. And the rental income stream would allow us to have Hamilton Accies, they're housed for all time. North Lanarkshire have 3 professional teams, and at that point, South Lanarkshire only had Hamilton Accies. So that was us. So we accommodated the Hamilton Accies, and that was the deal. At the same time, we sold part of the land to Morrison's that allowed them planning consent for a superstore. Now that now employs hundreds of people that's helped greatly with the multiple deprivation in the in the area. So that was the deal. It wasn't the council more recently have said, the leases came to an end, and they've made it seem as if we don't need the building now. They've actually made it sound as if the whole thing was about a 20-year lease, when they know that's not the case. Now, I can only imagine as officials, we've got cross-party support for the council to continue to stay there. See the fact that we've got a 20-year agreement in place. Now, not only do we help with the addictions, we've got the children with autism, we've got sensory cabins, we've got cinemas, we help with the fibro chronic pain groups, Go Kids, the Shed Men, the charity, and not to mention, we've now, you've said 10 years in the Premiership, yes, but we've also have an elite, a platinum elite academy. There's only 9 in the country, and Hamilton Academical Football Club have one of those 9. You know, we do the girls' football team has 150. They now play at the highest level. Our youth academy has played in Europe. They went undefeated. You know, this is it. The board of directors with the football, we have delivered, and the council are choosing to abandon that. Now I don't know who's made. They don't seem to have any. They seem to be leaderless. There's a new leader, Cleland Snedden. I've wrote to him. I've posted a 6-page letter on our website that clearly says everything we've done.
Well, my own boys might end up in your academy. And they're pretty hot. But the work that you have done and the club has done, and the work that your charities are doing, this is very poor reward. I can promise you my own political support. I am, as you know, involved in the local community. And any platforms I've got, Colin, treat them as your platforms. We'll return to this subject. Finally, just remind people how they can support the pantomime. They don't even need to watch it, but they can still support to it. What can they do?
Well, firstly, it's going to be a great show, but there's also the Just Giving, I believe, that you've been good enough to put on the screen, or even better still on the other issues. If they got the answer, see if the council would turn around and give us some answers on that. That would be better if they reconsidered their position on that. Because as I say, that one of the bigger issues is that is a betrayal of the people. Hopefully mentioning that on there might help bring the new
politicians have got to be very careful about betraying the people, as many have found. And so they should pay attention to this interview tonight. I hope that they will.
George, one thing I was going to say, that Hamilton Accies, see White Hill, Blantyre, they need a voice. I would support anybody that came to be a voice of the people there, because the people, there's nobody listening to me anymore. So we need a voice there. It has to be a voice that's to come there and be heard. And they have to take heed of this. This isn't about saving rent for South Lanarkshire Council or moving into a cheaper building. We're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about the work that we've done to drag Hamilton and the different parts of the areas in Lanarkshire out of the multiple deprivation areas. That's the reality. They need to sit down. They cannot be allowed to say that this is only about saving rental income. This was a social compact. They're well aware of the outset of this. They're well aware of why this was set up, and the councillors that put it in place. The politicians in the council, they have to have a look at this. This could be officials that's doing this. This is a major mistake, and it's a big council that can sit down and revisit this and accept that they've made a mistake, and let's get this back on track. They can't derail the work we're doing. We've been 19 years working on this day and night to help and serve our community.
Well, I'm at your service, and I'm a voice. Colin McGowan, many thanks indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you. Now, the second poll is up. Who should play the horse's rear end in my pantomime? Well, it's Colin's pantomime, but I'm in it. A, Boris Johnson. B, Sir Keith Starmer. C, Donald Trump. Who's the horse's ass of the year is essentially the question that we are asking. Let me squeeze a quick call in before the news. Graham is in Ayrshire. Go ahead, Graham.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I wanted to talk to you about the public trust in the vaccine that was announced this week, the Pfizer vaccine, that is for COVID-19.
Yeah.
I think this is a really important matter because obviously if no one takes the vaccine, it's not going to prevent any outbreaks. And in order to achieve that, we need the public to have trust in it.
Millions will be taking it, Graham. Don't be in any doubt about that. Every person I've spoken to this weekend, which because of football is a large number, is straining at the leash to get the vaccine.
Well, there was a poll done this week that found that 10% of people would probably be in that anti-vaxxer category, so that's 10% that won't take it.
Yeah, and 90% will. That's about right, I think. Yeah.
Right, sure, but there's also a 50% who are hesitant about the vaccine, and that's quite significant as well, because I think in order to get that 50%, which is one you really want to target because they are not impervious to facts like the anti-vaxxers are, I think we need to have a proper dialogue about this vaccine and talk about both its strengths and its limitations. And I don't think the scientific community so far, and the media at least, have done a really good job of that. Because every time they're on TV, they seem to be, I suppose, very effusive, maybe even sanguine about the vaccine. And there's that kind of lack of critical engagement with the evidence at the moment that I think is going to be a big problem because of the past year, public trust is so low. Not in just the scientific community, obviously in big pharma and the government as well. And these are things that I think have to be addressed. And one thing in particular, when I'm talking about the limitations of the evidence, is that none of the people who are praising the vaccine that we're seeing on TV have actually seen the data from the phase 3 trials because it hasn't been published for public scrutiny. So if you want to have that higher uptake, I think we have to be engaging with that, and I think we have to have the actual public data made public so that people can scrutinise it for themselves, so that we know that the scientists themselves are scrutinising it. And at the moment, what we're relying on basically is the MHRA's word. They've done the review and they've told us it's very rigorous. And for my money, it probably will. We probably can trust them on it. But you've got to remember, the public has come through a year where they've been told by scientists not to wear masks to start with, that schools and universities should stay open, airports could stay open, that was meant to be safe. They even prompted at one point, they wanted to go for that natural herd immunity. So this confidence in scientists' words on things isn't going to be good enough.
Well, I'll tell you what, stay tuned, Graham, because Dr. Brar's up right after the news. I've certainly got confidence in him, and I think you should too. So wait to hear what he says on the points that you have made. Kindly, please. Thank you very much. I'm late for the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Post-Brexit trade negotiations between the United Kingdom and the European Union are in a very difficult position, according to a senior British government cabinet minister who said that the country is still ready to keep negotiating until there is no point in doing so any further. Environment Secretary George Eustice said progress was being made, but the EU had added a whole load of additional demands, which created problems. Negotiators are returning to the table in what has been called a final throw of the dice to strike a deal, as former Prime Minister Gordon Brown warned of an economic economic war with Europe or the US if one cannot be reached. Eustace said that the UK is prepared to make some agreements on the so-called level playing field, but argued that the EU must treat the UK as a sovereign power. However, there were still sticking points on fishing and business rules remaining. One of the disagreements is over access to UK waters by the EU's fishing fleets, an issue which erupted last week, with the UK accusing the EU of making extra last-minute demands. Another is what measures there should be to enable a level playing field for businesses on both sides. If a deal is not reached, border checks and taxes will be introduced for goods travelling between the UK and the EU at the end of the year. The National Health Service will begin what it has deemed the largest rollout ever of a vaccine in UK history on Tuesday, according to the Department of Health. Frontline health staff, people over the age of 80 and care home workers will be the first to get the COVID-19 vaccine. In England, 50 hospitals have been initially chosen to serve as hubs for administering the vaccine. Refrigerated containers holding the vaccine doses have been arriving in the UK from Belgium and are being prepared to be moved from secure locations to hospitals. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will also begin their vaccination programmes from hospitals on Tuesday. The streaming service Netflix says it will not warn viewers of The Crown that some of the scenes are fiction. Responding to calls for a warning from Britain's Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, the company has said the series has always been billed as a drama, and as a result they have no plans and see no need to add a disclaimer. Dowden had said earlier that younger viewers may mistake fiction for fact when watching the fourth series, which shows the breakdown of the marriage between the Prince and Princess of Wales. The Crown's creator, Peter Morgan, has called the show an act of creative imagination. Roald Dahl's family has apologised for anti-Semitic comments made by the best-selling author who died in 1990. A statement condemning Dahl's controversial comments made in two interviews in 1983 and 1990 were published on his official website. In a discreet part of the site, his family and the Roald Dahl Story Company deeply apologised for the lasting and understandable hurt caused. The statement reads, "It said his prejudiced remarks stand in marked contrast to the man that they knew." Roald Dahl first made anti-Semitic comments in an interview with The New Statesman in 1983, and 7 years later in the piece for The Independent, the author acknowledged he had become anti-Semitic. In 2018, the Royal Mint chose not to issue a commemorative coin on the 100th anniversary of his birth because of his anti-Semitic views. Dahl's novels include Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda and the BFG. All have been adapted for the big screen. US President Donald Trump has held his first rally after losing the US presidential election. The event in Georgia comes before key Senate runoff elections there in January, which will decide the control of the upper house. Trump has repeatedly refused to admit his defeat and made numerous unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. Ahead of the rally, he criticised Georgia's Republican governor on Twitter, calling on him to help overturn Joe Biden's election victory in the state. Biden will take office on the 20th of January, regardless of whether Trump admits defeat. Residents of a coastal resort town on a popular Australian holiday island have been told to leave immediately by authorities as a bushfire worsens. Firefighters are struggling to control the huge fire on Fraser Island off the east coast of Queensland. The bushfire was sparked by an illegal campfire in mid-October and has destroyed at least 82,000 hectares of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. A heatwave in southeast Australia has exacerbated bushfire conditions. The Fraser Island fires are among the most serious since the end of last summer, and Australia's 2019-2020 bushfire season was its most intense on record, though not its most deadly. Venezuelans are today choosing the 277 members of the National Assembly in an election which is being boycotted by most opposition parties who've denounced it as a fraud. The election comes amid a 2-year power struggle between sitting President Nicolas Maduro and opposition leader Juan Guaido. The National Assembly, with Guaido at its helm, is the only institution not controlled by Maduro's socialist PSUV party, but that is almost certain to change in this election. And finally, chess is enjoying an unprecedented boost in popularity because of lockdown and the success of the hit TV show The Queen's Gambit. Set in the 1960s, it follows the story of fictional child prodigy Beth Harmon, who rises to become a grandmaster in the male-dominated world of chess. Garry Kasparov, the former chess world champion and one of the sport's greatest players, acted as a consultant on the show to ensure authenticity. He said the show refuted the image of the game of chess as something that could turn you into a nerd or just make you crazy. According to the International Chess Federation, in the 10 days following the release of the Queen's Gambit, searches for the words chess set on eBay surged 273%. That's a search every 6 seconds. The Federation said that following the show's release on October 23rd, in the middle of the COVID lockdown, chess has enjoyed a huge surge in online interest. At the beginning of 2020, up to 11 million games of chess were played online every day. After lockdown, this number had increased by up to 17 million, while these platforms recorded an increase in 40% of new accounts registered. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Just listening to the news there, why do these superannuated prime ministers and ministers always warning Britain about a trade war with Europe? Why don't they warn the European Union about the consequences of a trade war with Britain? Why are they always on the side of the others and never on the side of their own country? Gordon Brown, representing a Labour Party that is overwhelmingly considered in the country to be a party that doesn't actually like Britain very much. And they haven't yet cottoned on to that. Look, if you want a deal, then make a deal. But if you are now adding at the last minute a raft of new demands, including the demands that we allow European countries to catch 2/3 of our fish, and that we are not allowed to give state aid, say, to the car industry or the steel industry, well, I'm afraid I don't want that kind of. If that's the terms of your deal, then get on your pantomime horse and beat it out of town. That's my point of view. I support Brexit, yes. I'm not against having a free trade deal with the European Union. But don't try and make a deal that renders Brexit null and void, which prevents us doing the kind of things that we voted for Brexit in order to do. Do you see? And if they drag that Gordon Brown out for anything else, I swear I'll scream every time I see his grisly visage on the television. They tried all that before in the Brexit referendum itself. I'll tell you, if John Major, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown tell me something, I'll automatically believe the opposite to be true. It's about time these people who all pretend to be great PR merchants realised that. I'm sorry, Dr. Ranjit. I've taken up some of your time. Dr. Ranjit Brar, NHS consultant, physician and surgeon on the coronavirus, as usual. One day, Doctor, we'll be able to talk about something else, but today we'll have to talk about the coronavirus, and in particular, the vaccine. You've heard, I think, I hope, some of the points that have been made on the show already about it, but give us first your view on where we stand right now with the vaccine.
Thanks, George. Really enjoying your show. I think the first thing to say is that your last point wasn't at all stealing my thunder. I think it's a point which is leading to these crises of confidence that we're seeing now. So I think the crisis of leadership, the fact that you're told to do something by our current leadership as well as the past Labour leadership, and you want to do the opposite, is precisely the problem. The record levels of corruption that we've seen of our government, cloud everyone's understanding of this issue, whether they believe there's even a virus at all, whether we should take the medicine, whether we can trust anything that's happening. The record levels of privatization of our NHS make people increasingly distrustful of medicine, which is something we see in the private sector. And you see within private healthcare systems, there's huge levels of distrust because there's a clouding of, the interests, the health interests of the population, and the population are always overwhelmingly the working population on the one hand, and the business interests and the profit making of huge and very wealthy corporations on the other. And where those things get conflated, it's a free-for-all of opinion. Where we are on the vaccine currently, we will be having, as you've said before, 800,000 doses made available over the coming week. I have been contacted, for instance, and told that vaccine will be available to me this coming week. It will be the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. That is the mRNA vaccine. That is the vaccine that has to be, as you said, stored at minus 70 or 80 degrees C. And it's precisely for that reason that, one, that there's a relatively small number of doses. Two, that the conditions of storage and transport mean it will be easiest to distribute around certain central facilities close to the NHS. But essentially, in the first instance, it will be offered to, it seems to me, NHS staff who are a high-risk group, relatively speaking, in that a large number of them are actually relatively old, have comorbidities themselves, and obviously are working on the front line. And we saw 600 or 700, I think over 600 deaths of health and care workers.
600. That includes care homes, yeah?
That's right, care workers, Georgia. So that's where we are. I have been, I think, offered the vaccine. I'm likely to say yes and take the vaccine, just as I think I heard you indicate. I've been watching the show, that you would too. And I think that'll be most people's response. In the first instance, actually, there are relatively few doses. So beyond healthcare workers, I think likely that it's going to be rolled out in care homes, who I think are most vulnerable population, and then probably offered on a tier basis to the eldest and sickest within our society. But still, the vast majority won't receive it this year, I think. So this is not the end of COVID, even if we were to assume perfect efficacy and perfect safety of the vaccine, George, and perhaps we should talk a little about that too.
Yes, but before we do, why does it have to be stored at such an extraordinary low temperature?
Well, this is not a common or garden vaccine. Most of the vaccines that we have, the initial vaccines, the polio vaccine, for example, were based upon an inactivated version of the actual virus itself, and that's a protein. Those proteins can be stored at cool temperatures in fridges, and we're used to having our childhood vaccinations, our children have vaccinations, going to see the clinic nurse, perhaps at your local general practitioners, and then being stored in fridges, being taken out and administered to you, me, our children, and that's how we think of vaccines. And the protein vaccines, the inactivated vaccines, that is the model that's been used overwhelmingly by the Chinese. They have 5 vaccines, as you said, made by 3 different companies. All of them are essentially the inactivated protein vaccines. They've been given to 1 million Chinese citizens in total, with an incredibly good safety profile, and those are storable essentially at room temperature or just below, so those would be much easier to distribute. These ones are mRNA. Anyone who has worked with RNA or mRNA, I myself used to do a trial or participate in a trial where I was isolating mRNA from patients with aneurysms. Aneurysms is a condition that I deal with surgically, but we're doing medical investigations into the genetics of aneurysms. And if you extract RNA and DNA from cells, it's unstable. And so to preserve its structure and function, it does need to be stored at low temperatures. And minus 70, we used to have to put it in dry ice. So with carbon dioxide, the stuff that produces the smoke for effects on TV screens and cinema productions. But we use that to keep a temperature of minus 70 whilst transporting it within kind of rapid delivery mail system. This obviously will be far larger numbers, so lorries and large low temperature fridges will be needed, and there aren't enough of those to supply the vaccine to everyone in the country at the moment. These statements are being produced, which really are just the initial press release of the company themselves. They've been released and reproduced by agency after agency, by the government, and then the government circulate them to other people. And I've even had it from the Royal College of Surgeons. But essentially, I can see it's the same document cut and paste that's delivered by the company themselves. So we are at the point where they're assuring us that they have a great level of knowledge and experience of distributing cold vaccines. But really, this would be a world first. And certainly to imagine that the entire world could take such a vaccine would be a far-fetched scenario, George.
Yes, quite. I mean, portability within our country is one problem, and it's a big one. Portability internationally to poor countries with less reliable electricity supply and so on would be impossible.
I think that's right. And I think it's very unlikely that this vaccine will get widespread currency in the world, partly for that reason, partly because it's a new technology, and partly because actually, the results, as one of your callers was saying, really haven't been adequately published. We have to assume that they've been shared fully and scrutinized by the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, and that the safety data is good. But so far, all I've seen is that a press release stating that the safety data is good. So I hope it is, and I'm sure it is for that small number of patients who participated in the trial, which is 44,000. Makes it a large trial, but a very small number compared to the numbers who are about to receive that vaccine. And I look upon this next wave of injections of the NHS as being the largest phase of the trial so far. And we will have more information. I hope that there will be very rigorous screening of the patients my colleagues, really, myself and my colleagues and other people around the country who take the vaccine, and I hope that it will prove to be safe and efficacious as indicated. But it does concern me that the results haven't been published. There's not really been peer review, that the follow-up period is very short, that we're assured that this works for all people in all countries in all parts of the world. But we haven't seen really whether one arm is comparable to the other. I mean, there's a kind of very standard. Again, I have designed and run randomized controlled trials, and it's a very rigorous process. And so, you have to produce a power calculation. You have to show what size of effect you're expecting to see between the vaccinated arm and the non-vaccinated arm, design your trial accordingly, and publish that data normally in advance. And I've not been able to find that when I'm looking for it on the web. You have to share your results in a certain way, be very rigorous about the statistical methodology that you use. You have to normally peer review your process, show that it's very rigorous and it's double blinding, and show that the two arms really are the same, that the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated arm, are they comparable? And if we really look at this trial, and even if you pool everyone, really you're looking at the unvaccinated arm having a far less than 1%, maybe half of 1% or slightly more of them contracted the virus. And that seems very low. If we're really talking about the United States and Britain, if we look at the current figures in the United States, 15 million people have had the virus. It means that far more probably than 1% of the population have had the virus. Indeed, they're talking about close to 1% of the population having died. So, 66,000 out of 66 million would be 0.1%. The figures don't seem quite to add up. Certainly, if you look at the hotspots, we think somewhere between 5 and 20% of some populations, high-risk populations, will have already had COVID. If that's the case, you would expect to see a far higher number of people within the non-vaccinated arm contracting the virus. It doesn't seem right that people who haven't had the vaccine are also protected within the trial from getting the virus. So there are many questions, I agree, which are left unanswered. And I think the best way to answer them is simply to publish the data, let them be scrutinized. And that's kind of unanswerable. That's something that we can all believe in, other than those who will never be convinced and will never be convinced by the technology of vaccination. And I'm clearly not in that camp. You aren't. Most people aren't. Vaccination in general is a good technology. But this is a new kind of vaccine. And they've not been transparent in the way they publish data. And as we talked about yesterday, they had a conference and said they would start using, celebrities to push the vaccine. Matt Hancock has said he'll have the vaccine live on TV. I've even heard that the Queen, though she won't have it live on TV, will let it be known that she's had the virus. So all of these kind of media tactics to promote a vaccine rather than simply sharing the data and letting us scrutinize the knowledge base, which would be normal, I think add to people's sense of disquiet. So I agree with you. Probably most people will take the vaccine if offered.
Talking of questions, Doctor, they're banking up here. Would you be so kind as to listen in to some of these calls?
Absolutely, love to.
Wayne in Cheshire. Go ahead, Wayne.
It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you, sir.
I think I'll be one of the first to be asked or ordered to take the vaccine, but this first one, the Pfizer one, I will not be taking it. I've done a lot of research on it on the government website and the Pfizer website and ulterior media. I've come to the conclusion that, it actually says that the one that we're about to have changes your cells on a genetic level. Now, the other vaccines, such as the Russian Sputnik, etc., they are made the old-fashioned way, the same as when you get a flu jab. Now, I'm willing to take that, but I am not willing to have my genetic level on my cells to be changed in such a way that we don't know what are the side effects for the future. Plus, another concern of mine is that this one is $38 a vaccine. The Sputnik one is $8. Why aren't we using that to save money?
This is a question Dr. Brower and I have spoken about many times. Not only is the Russian and the Chinese vaccine more efficacious, more widely trialed, but it is virtually at cost. It's $8 as opposed to, what did you say, Wayne, more than 30?
38, 37.
30, nearly $40. Dr. Brower, what do you say to Wayne's points?
I think I agree with the substance of what he's saying. I mean, there's a scientific point on which I do disagree, Wayne, and we've talked about that a little bit before as well. So these messenger RNA is a substance which, so your normal way your cells work is they have a nucleus that's full of DNA. That DNA carries a code which can be transcribed or translated into messenger RNA that goes outside the nucleus into the protein manufacturing mechanism, the Golgi body, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, these parts of the cell which make proteins. And that is then used in these ribosomes, which then translate that into a protein. So really, there's not a huge difference between giving the mRNA and giving the protein. It's just there's a stage whereby your cellular apparatus, just as it is affected by a virus and produces certain proteins, so this vaccine will encourage it to create a protein, and that protein happens to be the spike protein that is displayed by the certain part of the immune system to your white blood cells, and so your acquired immunity then is able to make antibodies. So it's just a way of training your own body to make antibodies to a part of the COVID virus. I don't think it's true to say, I've seen these kind of, and that is just a false claim, and it's sad. That's a misleading claim to say that this is going to affect the genetic structure of the people who take it. That's not true. I mean, living in the world affects genetic structure. Sunlight affects genetic structure. So your genes don't exist in some kind of a pristine isolation from the material world around it. But this isn't dangerous in terms of reprogramming or introducing some new aspect on a reproducible basis to your genetic code that will affect you or your future. That is not true. But on your other points, that it's expensive.
What about the Sputnik point? $8 as against 38.
Well, I think those are very true. I think if you see, there's a level of propaganda here. If you see that I guess capitalism to an extent is incapable of existence without corruption. And we've seen the NHS being corrupted by this revolving door. The chief managers of the NHS are people from private industry. In fact, the person who runs the NHS, Sir Simon Stevens, really is a scion of the private health insurance. So the ethos is corrupted by the higher levels of so-called public service in the NHS, in government, serving the private sector. And we've seen that. There's a classic example in Tony Blair, someone who served the oil sector, served the armaments manufacturer, has retired from government, has been given huge amounts of lucrative jobs and advisory contracts, and now is a multimillionaire himself with 400 million. On a small scale, you're seeing a similar thing where it does seem that our government are very protective of the interests of certain massive Western multinational companies. It doesn't make sense financially for our government not to take the cheapest and most efficacious vaccines, which happen to come from, Chinese companies and Russia. But they absolutely won't do that. They've poured scorn on their results. They've poured scorn on whether we can trust their science. There's a degree of chauvinism involved in that. There's a degree of great world power involved in that. But there's just a straightforward degree of corruption. There's a close link between our government and these companies. So there's unquestionably the case that this is a relatively new technology. It has the least well-published results so far. And so how it has been rushed through without really a level of public scrutiny, whereas we have had cold water poured all over the efforts of the Chinese and the Russian. Actually, more and more, they're just left out of the media. You could imagine at the moment that they didn't exist.
Don't exist, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Let's take Tom in Liverpool. Tom.
Hiya, thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome.
I'm also just concerned, not so much, I'm not an anti-vaxxer and never would be kind of down that path or train of thought, but I've been reading the actual published government document of the side effects and the possible adverse reactions to the vaccine. I've actually got it up now while I'm speaking, just so I don't misquote it in any way. And other than obviously some of the side effects being the pain and the general side effects of vaccines and stuff like that, it has some concerning sentences in the report, such as effects on fertility. It is unknown whether the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine BNT1216-2B2 has an impact on fertility. So it just outright states that it is unknown what kind of effect it's going to have down the line on fertility in general. That's all it says about that.
I didn't know that. Good question, Tom. Let's hear Dr. Brar on that.
I mean, thanks for that question. So, I mean, the general side effects that have been published for all the vaccines, regardless of the technology that I have seen and been familiar with, are the ones we'd expect in terms of pain, swelling, a little bit of fever, headache, malaise, in other words, feeling a little bit unwell, sometimes mostly mildly, sometimes for a bit longer. So I must say the Oxford AstraZeneca trial was briefly stopped when there was a case of transverse myelitis, which is a kind of a inflammation of the spinal cord. But ultimately that was found to be, we are informed, not related to the vaccine. So the trial was restarted. I haven't seen deaths. I haven't seen very serious consequences. The most serious one likely to be the case is some kind of allergy. Even if a small percentage of people develop some kind of allergy to one of the vaccines, then that could have serious implications in terms of its safety profile. But that hasn't been reported in any of the data I've seen. So to say it's unknown. They've been saying it's unknown, the effect on pregnant women, because pregnant women weren't included in the trial, is my surmise from that. Though, again, the exact structure and nature of the trials really haven't been published in detail, so it's hard to say. So they're not recommending that pregnant women take the vaccine. But fertility, I've not seen any implication that it would. I'm not sure the mechanism by which it would affect fertility. So I think this is simply in the realm of unknown at this stage. And while that's disquieting, there's an extent to which every new medicine, when it first is introduced, we don't know its effect on a huge number of people. And all medicines which are introduced have an ongoing system of reporting, whereby if a number of cases of a suspected adverse event linked to that medicine come to light, this should be flagged up to the regulator. Use of that medicine should be temporarily suspended, or that an investigation should be conducted to see whether there truly is causality. So this level of scrutiny I would absolutely expect should attach to this vaccine as it's being rolled out, as it would be to any other medication. But I don't know. I haven't heard of any specific problems with the reproductive system.
Thanks for that, Tom. There's a call from China, Hong Kong in China, from Christopher. Go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah, how are you this evening, George? Pleasure to be on the show, and pleasure
Lovely
to be on the
hear
show
a
with Ranjit,
Welsh
actually.
accent coming from China. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do like my accent as well. Ranjit's been quite correct in most of the observations he's made with regards to the UK and NHS rollout of the Pfizer vaccines, no complaints there, actually 100% on the ball. With regards what's happening here in Asia Pac, actually there's quite a lot happening, I must say. Presently, we've got 5, as China has 5 registered vaccines with WHO, World Health Organization, and we've got another 1 coming online now. So that's 6 candidate vaccines from China. Very good news. The bad news is Asia Pac's also seen a large uptick in COVID-19 infections over the past 3 weeks. Indonesia's being hit severely, Philippines being hit severely, Hong Kong, where I am, is being hit significantly. We're back on shutdown again. Japan, Tokyo, 500 cases a day. South Korea, 1,000 cases a day. It's not looking good.
These numbers are minuscule, of course, compared to ours.
Oh, compared to Europe, these are small numbers. But given the effort that's been undertaken to contain the pathogen, it gives an indication of how aggressive the pathogen is in the transmission rate. So here in Hong Kong, we've had a very large outbreak centered around, believe it or not, come dancing places, 21 in fact, around 1,500 people involved in that being tested and traced. Of those people, more than 600 are infected. This is all in the past 3 weeks. We've had more than 1,000 infections in the past 4 weeks. We have 31 people in a critical condition in hospital and 305 people in a serious condition in hospital. And this is in a bloody country that's kept a firm, solid lid on what's been happening. So
very powerful call, Christopher. I'm very grateful for it. Dr. Brar, last one. Tell us how you respond to that.
Well, I think it's right. It shows it's a global problem. With this week, actually, in terms of the virus overall, in terms of tested cases, has been the worst on record. So there's been an uptick of 5 million cases this week, and we've seen days where almost 700,000 people around the world have contracted the virus, but test proven, and 13,000 deaths. So it shows you that China is taking this very seriously, precisely because they've been so effective, in shielding their population through amazing use of public health measures. They limited the virus in the first instance to less than half of 1% of their population. But that means that much more than 99% of the population are vulnerable to it. So vaccination has a big role to play there. They, as you quite rightly say, have 4. And you say 5 now, so that's great. Vaccines, I think all the ones that I've seen have been the relatively old-fashioned technology, but tried, tested, proven of an inactivated virus. They've given it to more than a million people, and it has a fantastic safety profile and efficacy so far. So they are getting ready, as they are in Moscow and other places, to start mass vaccination campaigns, and it will have a tremendous role in allowing them to move into normalcy, because when it's so prevalent around the world, when the United States has got up to 15 million and almost 300,000 deaths, 288,000, 289,000 deaths, there's the constant risk of reintroduction from the rest of the world via China's and other countries' very extensive transport links. So vaccination unquestionably will have a role to play in limiting the impact of coronavirus, and in a sense, a bigger role for those who've been more successful at curtailing its spread through public health measures. George.
Dr. Brar, thanks as always. Very, very grateful to you. And thank you, Christopher, in China, for that call. Give me a 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? We're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Calls through to 10 o'clock. Mick in Liverpool. Go ahead, Mick.
Hi, Mick. George, how are you doing?
All good. Nice to hear from you, sir.
All over the place there. Thank you for adding about that. I just wanted to call in about the poll that you've made, saying about which is more acceptable, the poppy,
oh, yes,
or whether
yes.
it's taking the make, or whether there shouldn't be any political discourse in football. Obviously, I'm very excited about fans being let back. I'm an Evertonian, so that's a little bit of perspective about maybe how I feel about the Millwall fans. But my answer to it would be, it's up to the players. It's their decision if they want to take the knee, if they want to wear the poppy. That is fully their decision. But what
Mick, take your hand away from the phone.
Hello, can you hear me any better now?
Not much better, but go on. We can hear you well enough.
Right, okay. I'll try and keep the phone still. So I think it's the players' decision whether they wear a poppy or whether they take a knee.
Yeah, I think that's right. The question is whether the players are now still freely taking that decision, or whether they just don't want to be the one that says, actually, you know, I think it's gone on long enough.
Well, to me, taking a knee is protesting against racism. So if the players want to do that and want to take that stand, that's what I'm saying, their choice. But that's what it's about, George. And at the end, I think there's really comrades and all there's different things that we get.
Okay. I mean, there are other ways, of course. I'd rather give a clenched fist salute than take the knee. Personally, I kneel only before God, but it's an issue that's going to run and run. Mick, thanks for the call. Ronwell is in Chicago about Joe Biden. Go ahead, Ronwell.
Hello, George. I'm glad to speak with you.
And you, go ahead.
About Biden's presidency, the only way I'm looking forward to Biden's inauguration is if Biden invited some 13-year-old boy from New Hampshire, which that can inspire me. But there's something I need to say this. Biden said in the video where he said to Obama that if he and Kamala disagreed on some kind of moral principle, he would develop some kind of disease, resign, elevate Kamala as our first male president, and may appoint Hillary as a VP, which I fear that, and I don't want that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I didn't see that comment. He said that if he disagreed with Kamala Harris, he would resign. I think we've lost Ronwell. It wasn't the greatest of lines. Let me read some stuff before the next call comes up. Adam says, football is a universal love for many. It's where we go to forget life's woes. If you're a supporter of a certain football team, as I am, that doesn't quite work nowadays. Jason says, no political gesture should be mandatory by club or manager. If, however, a player genuinely wishes to show solidarity with a political cause, then it's their decision and should be allowed and respected. Well, of course, the great Robbie Fowler was punished heavily for lifting up his jersey after he scored a goal and showing on his vest, support the Liverpool Dockers. Celtic have been heavily fined because a section of the crowd have flown Palestinian flags, although other kind of flags seem not to attract the same attention from the authorities. There's a lot of double standards is what I'm saying. Mike is in South Carolina on the election. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, good to talk to you again. Never miss a show.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Hey, look, I talked to you Sunday after the elections here on the beginning of November, and I told you then that it was over and that there was no way that any of these things that Trump was bringing up were going to have any a possibility of changing the outcome of the election, and I still totally agree with that. But I do believe that I've been listening to you for the last few weeks, and you are bordering on the edge of some of this conspiracy stuff that would almost seem to make you irrelevant if you keep it up.
Well, imagine me imagining that there could be a conspiracy in America.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But here's the thing, George.
Well, how does that make me irrelevant? In my lifetime, the United States has been riven with conspiracies and very, very costly ones.
And you're absolutely right. And I'm not saying conspiracies don't exist here, but they don't exist in this election as far as Donald Trump's concerned. He's lost this election.
Well,
that's
but
over.
you're speaking as someone who doesn't like Donald Trump. I'm speaking objectively. I hate Trump. I hate Trump and Biden equally.
Wait, George, I don't like Biden either. I mean, I think you know that I was the strongest Bernie supporter that there was. Now, if you want to talk about was the election stolen, yes, it was stolen. Did the Democrats steal it? Yes, they did steal it. Did they steal it from Trump? No, they stole it from Bernie. That's who they stole it from.
Yeah, but if they stole it from Bernie, why is it such a leap to imagine that they went on to steal it from Trump?
Because of the way it was stolen, George. It wasn't stolen by stuffed ballot boxes and all this that you're talking about. It was stolen with money, okay? It was stolen by the oligarchy of the United States, the same way the oligarchy steals elections in the UK.
Yeah,
if you want to know, do you want to know exactly what happened?
No, but Mike, if more absentee ballots come in than were sent out,
then there would be an investigation.
That is ipso facto fishy.
George, listen to me. If, in fact, these elections that we're having now, as far as the actual ballots go, are way better than they ever were. If you remember back in the Bush years, when they passed the Help America Vote Act, there was no paper ballot at all. It was all done electronically, and it was all subject to thievery. Okay, Now every single ballot is done on paper backup. So if you need to recount the ballots, you can recount the ballots.
Well, that's a fact, but you need to know that the person that filled out the ballot paper was entitled to do so.
I know exactly what you're saying, but every single ballot that went out in the mail has a barcode that is unique to the individual that received that ballot.
Yeah, but how do you look? I've been in lots of elections, as you know, Mike, and I can tell you that the British equivalent of the Democratic Party are absolute geniuses at collecting other people's ballot papers and filling them in. Absolute genius. And there's plenty of people behind bars for having done so. Anyway, the hour is against us, Mike. It's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Jamie is in Malaga on Julian Assange. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good evening, George. I hope you're well.
Yes, by the grace of God, I'm good. Thanks.
Glad to hear that. Thank you for accepting my call and for the good work you're doing for Julian Assange.
Thank you.
I said I'd call in to tell you if we'd had a response to my letter to the governor of the prison, Rob Davis.
That's right.
And sadly, there's been no response. And the situation is still critical. Julian is in solitary 24 hours per day in his cell with the rest of the wing. With infected prisoners, 65 prisoners have been moved onto his wing. So the state is an emergency, in my opinion. I have found that other members of our group who had written in for the same reason have had responses. They'd written in a week before me with slightly different letters, but they had a response. But a very, very sort of unhelpful response from the business manager, Mr. Harding, quoting government.
The business manager of a prison.
Exactly. Exactly.
What a strict...
And
I remember when they had wardens.
Exactly. No, it's extraordinary, and it's actually it's about 4 pages long, and it doesn't even make reference to the coronavirus. It talks about all the brilliant things they do for prisoners, and it denies that anybody is held in solitary confinement. It's an absolute farce.
Depends how you define solitary confinement.
Well, as we understand, Julian is held in his cell, which is, only the size of a single bed. And he's held in there, well, he's been held since April last year, 2019, for 23 hours a day.
It sounds like solitary confinement to me.
Exactly.
Well, what I do know, Jamie, is that Julian has a series of pre-existing conditions that leave him potentially fatally vulnerable to coronavirus infection. The second thing I know is that his wing, and in fact the whole of Belmarsh Prison, is a hot spot for coronavirus infection, infecting the staff and the inmates. And the third thing I know is that the authorities are moving people with coronavirus out of other wings into Julian's wing. Now that all sounds to me like a recipe for disaster. Last word to you, Jamie.
Absolutely, no, perfectly put. Thank you, George. Could I just separately, I'm part of one of the grassroots supporters for Julian Assange in London when I'm in London, but the group are based in London, and they do peaceful demonstrations outside of the Australian embassy on Wednesday, and they also go to the prison on Saturday at 12 o'clock and then to Piccadilly Circus. They follow all the sort of precautions for the coronavirus, and they have permits for doing this. But we need more people to support us, to actually get people on the streets, to share the message. The public are actually accepting this. They take the flyers, and people are becoming more aware and more interested and more appalled, of course.
And where is the Australian High Commission on Wednesday?
I haven't got the address at the moment in my mind. It's easy to find in the centre of London.
Yeah. All right. I need to go, Jamie. Tarif is in New Orleans on Black Lives Matter. Go ahead, Tarif.
How you doing, Mr. George? This
All
is
good,
Tarif.
brother. Thank you.
Black Lives Matter. I want to bring up Black Lives Matter. Black Gender Report did an article on them, and also 10 chapters of the organization, the people that the grassroots part of it. They wrote a letter to them asking Black Lives Matter Global Network. That's the ones that receive the money, and that's what you have your head spokesman, right? That works for. They wrote a letter to them saying, "Where's the money? Where have you had to receive anything from y'all?"
Millions have been given by some of the biggest corporations in the world to BLM. What did they do with that money?
I have no idea, but they should do an audit on them, take them to court or something to find out where that money went to. And also, I have one more comment, if you don't mind. You don't mind if I put my other comment?
Go on, bro.
Okay. Dealing with their elections, throughout the 2 weeks was going on with the Giuliani and Inwood and Sidney Powell and Gina Ellis. Come to find out, by listening to these different political scholars dealing with the Constitution, what's going to happen is this. Might happen. The governors and the state senators, the governor and the state secretary going to send their own electors to the government, to the Washington, D.C., right?
To the Electoral College.
To the Electoral College, to saying that give it to Biden. But the state senators, the state elected representatives, I'm not talking about your federal senators or your federal congressmen. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about your state senators and your state representatives, right? They can send their electors to Washington, D.C., so you can have 2 sets of them. So what's going to happen is that's going to trigger a constitutional crisis. That's going to be probably rushed to the Supreme Court. And when that happens is
Giuliani with his evidence and Sidney Powell with their evidence. They're going to put that up there for the benefit of the state representatives, right? And also, the Constitution, what I found out, actually sides with the state representatives with the electoral college, with them support, with their support of the electoral college.
It's obviously not over yet. Tarif, thanks for that call. Miles is in London. Go ahead, Miles.
Hey, George. Hello.
Hi.
I'm just following on from Jamie and Malago, and he's covered some of the points, but I wanted to sort of carry it forward a little bit.
Yeah.
The people like Mr. Harding are sort of very close to the decision-making in Belmarsh Prison, turning Julian's wing into a makeshift hospital without taking Julian out of that wing and sending him to a minimum security. Is that not corporate manslaughter?
Well, it's potentially, yeah.
Murder?
If not murder, it is potentially manslaughter, yeah. Because if someone's neglecting of their duty leads to the fatality of a prisoner, in this case Julian Assange, there would be a very strong case for corporate manslaughter, yes.
Yeah, there's only a couple of convictions under corporate manslaughter a year in the UK in the last decade.
Well, I know that.
So
I was involved in introducing the law on corporate manslaughter, which didn't exist until about 22 or 23 years ago. John Prescott introduced it, and I was involved from the backbenches in that law. But as I argued at the time, until corporations and the heads, the directors of them, start going to jail, then this law will fail.
Could we not get an injunction against these people for what they're doing to Julian?
Someone should look at that. His legal team should definitely look at that. I need to move on. I'm sorry, Miles, because of the hour. Jimmy is in Manchester. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Hi, George.
Hi.
George, just a quick one on the vaccine. I'm led to believe that the vials that the vaccines are transported in are going to be delivered in are in doses of 5, which is no problem because you're that many. And then when you get, if you should do 1 million vaccinations a week, they have to be repeated once every 3 weeks. How long you would think the vaccines are going to take to be distributed to everybody?
Well, I don't know that it can only be done 1 million a week. The army is going to be, the British Army is going to be deployed in Scotland, for example, administering this vaccine. If we all wait to get administered by our general practitioners, who are, of course, in most cases, very hard to see, then it will indeed be a problem. Jimmy, we'll need to come back to that because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol on the great Paul Robeson. Go ahead, Norma.
Well, yeah, I was going to actually, because that could be put through next week, but because we haven't got much time. But prior to that, I did want to just say about these Rohingya Muslims. I don't know if you're aware.
Of course, I've been involved in it for a long time.
Yeah. Well, the refugees have been forced to a sort of island. They're going to be cut off from the world. And, I mean, it's got to be stopped. They've been terribly badly treated, you know, and previous to that with the Myanmar, what I call genocide, and they've been screaming and shouting, and I just think it's awful.
Well, they've been effectively ethnically cleansed, some of them massacred by the junta in Burma, and that junta now includes the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, the darling of The Guardian and the liberal left for decades. But she now justifies the treatment of the Rohingya people in Burma, who, if they are lucky, have escaped to that island. If they are lucky, they have escaped to the refugee camps in Bangladesh, the world's poorest country. If they're unlucky, their houses are burned down and they're slaughtered in Burma.
Oh, it was terrible. And I mean, in actual fact, the video I saw, they were screaming and shouting and crying, and it was awful, George.
Oh, I've been long involved in this issue. You're right, though. We will have to leave Paul Robeson until
George,
next week.
Quick,
yeah,
George.
tell me. Go on.
Donald Trump, he might not have won the election, but Judd Trump from Bristol may be winning the snooker tonight.
Is that his name?
Judd Trump.
Jed Trump.
Judd
winning.
Trump. He was born in Bristol. He's playing in the final. And
he's winning the snooker tonight.
Well, he isn't actually, but he may do. We've got to wait another half hour.
Well, I hope that Donald Trump has the grace to tweet his admiration for Mr. Trump. Set them up on table 3, if you don't mind. Norma, thanks for that. It's always lovely to hear your voice, and the best to you and your husband from all of us here at the mother of all talk shows. I enjoyed the show. I hope you did. It's been marvellous for me. If it was for you, then come back next week at the same time, same place, and bring another viewer, another listener with you. May God go with you all.